Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. As I always say, this is indeed our show because this show can't be done without you guys joining me to make it happen. I'm glad that you guys can join me today. It's a early morning for me. I've been doing the news late into the night, or you can say early into the morning. Nevertheless, might be dragging ass, but I'm up, I'm here, I'm aware, and I am ready to do the news. We've had a lot of big and dramatic events that have taken place over the last, I don't know, 24 hours, if you want to call it. Just insane stuff that we've been effectively dealing with as a world and consuming as a world. One of the big things that have popped off is South Korea. The president declares martial law and turns himself into a god, or at the very least, a god for a good 6 to 8 hours. I'm going to recount what is taking place, and KJ is going to come on a little bit later to have a conversation about it. There's also reporting that Donald Trump, let's say, leaks from Donald Trump's area that Ukraine is going to give up territory or have to give up territory in order to get a deal. And that if Russia doesn't agree, that he is going to ramp up the amount of weapons that is going to Ukraine. This is patently absurd. If this is really Donald Trump's plans, then this is utterly absurd. The reason why I say it's absurd, if this is indeed Donald Trump's plans, okay, how's that different than Joe Biden? Joe Biden has given Ukraine any and everything that they could have ever wanted. Everything that Joe Biden said he wasn't going to give them, he ultimately and eventually gave them. So if you believe that you're going to get some leverage, some level of capability over Putin in this by giving Ukraine more weapons and threatening that, you're out of your mind. You're out of your mind. It shows a stunning lack of understanding of the context of the situation that's taking place on the ground. Because the reality of it is, there is no more leverage. You've expended all of that leverage under Joe Biden, as Joe Biden gave them every weapon system that they could think of. And if Donald Trump wants to escalate in regards to, let's say, certain other weapon classes that may change the context of the battlefield, then you have a world war. Either you accept the term under Putin's terms, you allow it to just stay the way it is, where Ukraine continues to just lose, and you give token help to Ukraine, or world war. Those are your three choices. There is nothing between that. If Russia gives something to give a face-saving mechanism, okay, that may take place. But let's be very clear. They are firing missiles into Russia right now. How do you escalate from that? I hope you get my point. Like, what's the next escalation that you're going to go with beyond them firing missiles in Russia right now? And Russia saying, this is a red line, meaning anything that you do beyond this point is a red line and will be responded to as such. I don't know if Putin is going to hit some European capital, pound the hell out of Ukraine. Yes, absolutely yes. And I would imagine those attacks will get more dramatic and more dramatic, and to the point either Ukraine collapses or they come to the table for a deal under Russia's terms. They're done with this frozen conflict stuff. That's not going to happen. They can see what's happening in Syria in regards to that being a frozen conflict that reignited out of the blue. That's not going to happen. So I don't know what he's going to do. All things being equal, though, it is somewhat on the right track to acknowledge the realities of battlefield conditions. And I suppose we'll see more at the point where Donald Trump gets into office. There's been so many leaks that have come out. Many of those leaks have been untrue. So who knows? Trump has been silent on this issue. Maybe this leak may be some idea of what he's thinking about, but there's no way to know. So I'll regard it when I see it, and I'll regard it that much more when Donald Trump says something out of his mouth about it. Wagner troops are apparently being sent to Syria. Now, they're not exactly Wagner troops anymore. Wagner folded into the military of Russia because there were legal reasons of fighting on Russian territory in a paramilitary, because it's kind of like in the U.S. The military doesn't really operate on Russian soil. And the moment that all of those regions became part of the Russian Federation, well, that's not a military at large. That is a military, quasi military with the Russian military at home. But whatever, besides the point, all of the problems associated with having foreign militaries or militaries on your soil. Well, we saw what happened with Wagner. There's that. But those military men of Wagner had folded into the Russian military. And the elements of the Russian military, special forces, are being sent to Ukraine. So there is that. The bombs, well, Russia apparently has been bombing Idlib, which is fascinating. In the very beginning, the U.S. had warned anybody from bombing Idlib. And at this point, because of the flexibility of everything, Russia has been hitting terrorist positions pretty hard. And I would imagine those attacks are going to escalate as the, let's say, elements of the Russian military move to this particular front in the battle. I want to have a conversation about North Korea, though. And by the way, if you enjoy the content, like it, share it, subscribe to it. You can support this content, PayPal, Patreon, or for that matter, Super Chats. All Super Chats or stickers will be read, providing they're not sexist, racist, or bigoted. And definitely, even if you like the video, that is also a big help. Share it far and wide, mama, daddy, grandpappy, etc., etc., etc. I am trying to reach 40,000. We are on our way to reaching that number for 40,000 by the end of the year. Damn it, I believe we can do it. It'll be close, but I believe in us. I believe we can do it. Doing the news, the best damn morning show, 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Anywhere in this physical matter reality that is covering domestic and international politics. Let's talk about North Korea. South Korea. I was fascinated by this. This is utterly astonishing. So, out of the blue, just out the blue, near midnight, the South Korean president, Yoon Suk Yeol, declares martial law. There is nothing that is going on to precipitate this, meaning there's not riots, there's not people burning buildings, police stations down. There's nothing like that. Out the blue, he declares martial law. And this immediately creates a constitutional crisis because, again, there was nothing going on. This is an illegal declaration of martial law, making himself a dictator. In his mind, most likely a god. Mind blowing. I mean, he comes out sitting at a desk and just declares it. It's panicky, illegal, completely unjustified power grab. And the issue is more so to the point that he was in a clash with the Democratic Party in South Korea. That party won a majority in the last election and had majority support, meaning it won in a landslide. And him not being able to get his budget done, him feeling like progress had been stalled in regards to South Korean politics. He comes out and he declares martial law. You know, the process of getting a coalition, fighting political battles, getting the public will to go with you, that became too difficult, too time consuming. He decided, you know what? Being a god is easier. So I'll just go out and declare martial law. He has to resign immediately. Immediately. Not just resign, snatched from office. It is outrageous. And just to go through it for a moment, South Korea, Jesus, has had a history of dictatorships. And that makes it more imperative to get rid of him now. Absolutely now. So he claimed that there were vague threats from North Korea. And those vague threats from North Korea pushed him to declare martial law, saying that he had to, ironically, protect constitutional order. That's effectively what he said. The steps or the things that he cited in concrete terms was that the Democratic Party would not move his budget, so he couldn't get his budget passed, and that the party was investigating his wife and other elements of his political entourage or camaraderie, basically the people around him. That is what he concretely said. But ultimately, when he tried to justify this as protecting democracy from North Korea and, protecting constitutional order from North Korean influence. So Jin Pak An-soo, now this was the man that Yoon, South Korean president, appointed as martial law commander. He immediately banned all political activities, whether political parties or political rallies. Basically, all political activities cease. This also included banning citizen rallies. Basically, the public can't come together. All of it stops. They also took over control of the media, effectively being able to control what is presented from the mainstream media and whatever points of view are espoused in that media. Again, dictatorial powers. That's why I'm calling it that. Because, yeah, it's martial law, but all things being equal, this was done to control media and the political space from a deeply unpopular president. His polling has been under 20%. When I say deeply unpopular, I mean deeply unpopular. That's the reason that the opposition won in spades in the last election. This was met righteously with overwhelming opposition. The public got involved. Parliament got involved. And what ended up happening was the public and the parliamentarians from the National Assembly streamed to Parliament. Many were able to get in. So 190 got in and immediately invalidated the martial law. Basically recalled it. Said, no, we're calling BS on this. This is undone now. The military did not abide by the parliament. So the military was going to stand by the president. So the military, the cops, they were going to stand by the president in his unlegal order. And they effectively went to storm parliament themselves. This was met with a barrage of public and cameras that blocked the military from doing the president's bidding. This is an astonishing sight. Look at this. they were blocking the military from getting into the building as Parliament was going about their way to try to pass laws in order to undo the martial law that was recalled. Just astonishing. I mean, like the sights that were taking place yesterday with the military and everything else that was basically going to Parliament Hall and the parliamentarians in the National Assembly while all of this was taking place, passing laws to undo it. It was dramatic, to put it mildly. Like the level of drama can't necessarily be understated in this. Here's another view of this. You got the military coming up. We have parliamentarians at the bottom. We have barricading in order to protect the vote. I want you to notice something else. Look at all the cameras. Look at all the cameras. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? Like, the public got involved. The press got involved. Everybody understood what was happening. Oh my God, he's just declared dictatorial powers. We must protect the parliament. The parliament is the last vestige of public will against what this dictatorial, insane, reckless president is doing. That's astonishing. And I say to myself, if anything happened like that, God, I hope we're able to do that. It is terrifying to me that the military and police were willing to just go to the mat for this illegal order. And truth be told, we have no idea what would have happened if the order went out, shoot your fellow citizens. In which case, you may have had a split, a break, where some decide, yeah, I'll do that. We can shoot our fellow citizens. And others says, this is too far. No. Which effectively breaks down into potentially a civil war. That's astonishing. The public got involved. They're like, we're not taking this laying down. Protesters immediately rallied, was attacking, or at that point going after the cops, going back and forth. You also had a situation where the opposition and the leadership's own party said this was too far. Meaning the leadership's own party came out and said, this was wrong. This was wrong. Under overwhelming pressure that was being applied by the political branch and by that point by the political branch and by the public, he pulled back the martial law, meaning he had to fall back, and not just fall back, he had to recall the martial law order. Yeah, Parliament had already killed it per se, somewhat, but all things being equal, they were still listening to the president. And so he called his goons back and he said, okay, fair enough. I will rescind the order for martial law. And he backed away. He backed away. Now, I called this order illegal because, right here, the president must notify the National Assembly that he has proclaimed martial law per translation of South Korea's constitution. The legislation can then be requested. The legislation can then request for martial law to be lifted, which is what they did with a majority rule, and the president must comply with such a request. Well, he just came out on TV and said it at night. And obviously the reason he went out at night, near midnight, is because I assume he thought that this would limit the capability of anybody to respond to what he was doing because it's at midnight. And so, if you think about it, he didn't do that. In fact, his order explicitly tried to avoid that provision in the Constitution, because what he did was to come out, say there's martial law because the North Koreans are invading our politics. And not only are the North Koreans invading our politics, we need to protect the Constitution. So I, ironically, would destroy the Constitution. Now, in doing what he did, and in having his martial law commander, which is a terrifying name if I ever could think of one, but the martial law commander coming out saying all political activity stops, all media is under our discretion, all public meetings, meaning people coming together, stops. You're not going to protest. Meaning they were killing political activity when Parliament had the right to review the martial law order in order to potentially lift that order. Meaning what he was trying to do was prevent Parliament from doing that job that they were allowed to do under the Constitution. Just astonishing. And bringing state power to bear in order to prevent Parliament from doing that constitutional job of oversight of a lunatic, corrupt president that needs to resign immediately. He needs to be gone immediately. When I say gone, if he doesn't resign at this very moment, then he needs to be removed from office. Parliament needs to get involved. You cannot have a reckless lunatic, sociopath that is willing to come out and completely ignore all notion of ethical, moral, constitutional responsibility. I get it. Politics is hard. It is very difficult to get people who you don't have any necessarily control over to follow you in your particular direction. But it is not your responsibility to go out and declare godhood and then to use this vague threat of the North Koreans. This other party is working with the North Koreans. The other party is not working with the North Koreans. The other party is just not as belligerent towards the North Koreans as he is. It's just that. And so you get America and our politics being exported to the other parts of the world. And so in our case, we say, okay, the Russians are working with Trump in order to go after so-and-so. The Russians are working with the Republicans because the Republicans are more likely to not be as belligerent and bat as crazy as the Democratic Party. And so that's what they use. Vague, not really there, doesn't really exist. The Georgian president comes out and says, the Russians are influencing our politics. Do we have any proof of it? Nope. We just feel it. That's what they're doing. And so instead of him dealing with the realities of the election, and for that matter, the realities of what the public wants, he decides, hey, America could do these vague threats. I'm going to do these vague threats. And yeah, I include Hillary Clinton in this, who threw out the vague Trump and Russia stuff. And I include Donald Trump in this for having a clumsy take on what Clinton did and just said there was fraud. I didn't lose. Like, this is a terrifying reality. In Georgia right now, the president has decided, I don't want to leave. French dual citizen president that even was part of, if I'm not mistaken, the European Union or European Commission or something like that. But my point is, she's a fixture, a part of the European Union system, and is against the Eurosceptic party that was elected by the majority of the population in Georgia. That's her issue. The courts didn't even take it up. And she's still sitting there saying, I'm not leaving because I have the backing of the US and Europe with me to try to overthrow this government. We were able to do it once. Damn it, we can do it again. And we're going to use the exact same playbook to do so. I'm saying this didn't come out of the blue, out of a vacuum. This came out of a context that was taking place around the world, especially with liberals. It is astonishingly dramatic that took place. Just astonishing, dramatic. I would imagine it is humiliating for him in this moment to have gone so far in order to be slapped down by not just the public, by his own party. It is incomprehensible, untrustworthy. He has lost all notion of credibility, all notion of trust. And yeah, as I keep pointing out, needs to be immediately snatched from that office. You cannot have somebody who is that depraved and willing to do this and remain in office after he does this. He must resign immediately. And if he does not resign immediately, snatched from that office. I mean, you must understand for the moment, this guy has like a under 20% rating at times, and yet declaring godhood. How do you do that? They've also been calling for investigations into his wife and some of the political allies that are around him. So he felt some kind of way that he couldn't necessarily get his way. And there apparently have been calls for impeachments and everything else. This was apparently his way out. What is that? Scratch a liberal, you get a Democrat. This is cancerous. This is cancerous. And I swear to God, we need to stop and get past this idea of you believe you can just do whatever you want in the political space. So if you lose, you no longer have to leave. You can, at that point, stay and fight, especially if there's a larger power that's backing you when you know what you're doing. It's fundamentally wrecking the Constitution of that country. I swear there needs to be consequences for this. And I mean severe and vicious consequences. Oftentimes, in a situation of a political coup, the people who are collaborators get shot. Now, I'm not calling for him to get shot. I am calling for him to be prosecuted for it. This breaches his powers as a president. I hope that's what I'm trying to get across. This is not a situation where a president seeing a real threat and responding to that real threat. This is a president that created a threat in order to assume powers that, because there was no real threat, those powers he did not actually or should not have legally possessed. There needs to be jail time for this. It needs to be no forgiveness, no compassion, period. You cannot instantiate this behavior. And there needs to be a clear nailing down of the fact this is not something we would abide. This is not something we're going to allow to prosper. And for eons into the future, any particular political person who's in a position of such knows that this way leads to oblivion. I am brutal on this because this is a terrifying reality. This is not a situation where you are in a world of law. The cops, the military, didn't care about the law. What they cared about was, president told me to do this, so I'm doing it. And again, as I keep pointing out, this could have led to disaster. I mean, if you got to the point where those protesters didn't listen, those protesters kept fighting because they should keep fighting, because after all of this is legitimate, then what do? Do you beat the protesters? You shoot the protesters? What if they get more aggressive? How far do you go in this illegal order? I'm just saying, it's astonishing, to put it mildly, dramatic, to put it mildly, and yet, on some level, I suppose it's resolved. That last point of resolution is going to be A, the president leaving office, and B, consequences for what the North Korean president tried to do. Just astonishing. I want to bring in our guests. We're joined with the one and only Laith Maroof. He is award-winning multimedia producer and media policy consultant focused on issues of liberation and decolonization from indigenous nations to Arab peoples, and building broadcasting capabilities for misrepresented and underrepresented communities around the world. Laith, man, I am glad to see that you are safe. How are you doing?
Good, good. Thank you very much, Jamal, for having me and for asking about my health. Thank you.
Well, I always am because I can't look, I'm not there. And because I'm not there, I can't exactly put myself in the position. And yet I do get the sense of dread um, that's associated with being in that region of the world, especially with Israel doing what it's been doing. That's why I don't want to, I don't mean to overplay it. I'm just
Yeah,
glad you're safe.
I have this tendency myself also to kind of belittle the situation I'm in. I go all the time on the front here, and I never wear flak jacket or a helmet, and all the journalists around me are usually wearing those. And it's not because let's say I don't want to ruin my hair or something, or I don't want to look bad in a flak jacket. It's just because I feel that I'm in nowhere any danger close to what people are in Gaza or other places, and I feel if I put those things on, I will just be like making myself and my safety look more important than those people. And I at the same time I also feel if I'm hit by a missile from a drone, it's not going to matter
Mm,
this helmet or this flak jacket.
it's not going to
I'd rather,
protect you.
yeah, I'd also rather die than live my life like lobotomized after or missing limbs in a way.
Yeah. It's funny. I feel you on that. For the longest time, I wanted my job to send me to Donetsk to see the battle in real terms. Because my feeling was, it's one thing having an opinion, looking at it perched so far away. It's another thing having an opinion when you could see it for yourself and you could feel some semblance of what the people feel when they're in that level of dread and not knowing. It's just like it's hard to understand if you're not part of it to understand, if that makes sense. So, no,
Yes. Yeah. Like there's a huge difference between field work in journalism
yes.
and remote pundency, or analytical work, analysis work, and you add to it obviously that once you go to a place, you have no choice but to learn more about its history and so
Exactly.
on, which adds to the knowledge that you have in terms of your ability to analyze it. It forces you that the field work to do all of these things, and this is why although I have been a media personality and an revolutionary activist in the West for decades, never put myself in a place until I'm here right now for the last six
Mhm.
years to take more space than the local people, right? Like
Yeah.
even when I was doing all this media work in Canada, in my time in Canada, I stuck to the issues of the diaspora in Canada.
Mhm.
Since I'm with them and part of them living their reality, therefore I am an expert. I didn't want to put myself in front of Palestinian, Syrian, and Lebanese journalists that are talking from the ground. But now I'm on the ground, so I feel I have the right to take a frontline position on the media on these issues.
Tell me something. This was a deal that was worked out between the Lebanese government representing Hezbollah, the Lebanese government that didn't fire a shot in anger at an Israeli government that was committing a genocide in Gaza and that invaded southern Lebanon. Amos Hochstein was the envoy for the United States that was working with the negotiation team. Hochstein was an IDF soldier, dual IDF citizen, former IDF soldier, part of the same organization that had been murdering Palestinians and Lebanese indiscriminately. So I was always a little dubious about the deal that they um, enacted. Then Yahoo immediately came out and said something to the effect of this deal allows us to kill or to get engaged in a conflict anytime that we deem it necessary, and even went further and saying we didn't end the war. And so when you had the situation where even CNN was forced to admit that Israel had committed nearly 100 violations, and was breaking the ceasefire deal, and you finally got to the point where Israel was accused of it, Hezbollah then fired off missiles also to make sure, hey, this was a deal, you're breaking the deal. Is it fair to say, is the ceasefire deal still in effect? And if so, how is it working in practice?
Yeah, there was never a ceasefire. Look, this deal was signed by the Lebanese government and the French and American brokers. There's no direct deal between Lebanon and Israel because Lebanon doesn't acknowledge the existence of Israel as a state. And so this is why the Lebanese government is talking to the French and the Americans as the ones who signed the deal on, there is no deal between Israel and Lebanon. Same time, when we look back at what was happening in Lebanon just before the signing of this quote-unquote ceasefire, we see that the capital was being bombarded, the whole country was being bombarded, and we were at the edge of a full-out war because the Zionists were losing on the ground against Hezbollah in the south of Lebanon. It was 65 days or 66 days of their attempt to invade, and they couldn't move, beyond the first, few kilometers into the territory. So, and the government in Lebanon is not sovereign. It doesn't really represent the will of the people. There is no president. The prime minister is a caretaker prime minister, and the head of the military is appointed by the American embassy. Okay, the General Aoun, Joseph Aoun. And so, I think why Hezbollah allowed this to happen is twofold. One, because the propaganda of the pro-American side that are very small here in Lebanon claimed that Hezbollah got the country in this trouble. If they just stop firing, Israel would not destroy Lebanon or attack Lebanon or violate the sovereignty. The US and France can guarantee our sovereignty. That is the main propaganda of the puppets here in Lebanon. So by Hezbollah accepting this and then sitting back and watching as the Zionists not only violated the sovereignty 100 times, but killed now close to 20 civilians, and are actually moving their troops inwards, invading more, as the Lebanese government and Lebanese army are just watching.
That's what I thought.
Okay. Yes. So now Hezbollah has debunked fully the propaganda of the tools of the West in the country. And when it starts defending the land again and going into a full-out war, it will be hard to convince anybody that Hezbollah is to blame. Because from this point on, Hezbollah will be defending Lebanese territory. They will be anymore just doing a support solidarity front for Palestine, because the Israelis are still occupying a few of the villages and are pushing forward in to occupy more. Now Hezbollah will be acting as the sovereign in the country and defending Lebanese territory, and everybody will support it in the country.
Yeah. What's wild about it is my thought was the way that the United States has engaged the entire way through. They've lied. So if Hamas wanted a deal, they would say, well, Israel, it's Hamas that's preventing a deal. It's Hezbollah that's preventing a deal. They would go to political aims. So in the UN Security Council, they would say, well, this is a non-binding resolution, meaning they lied all the way through in defense of Israel. My thought was if Israel did anything on the ground, whether it was bombing, whether it was breaking ceasefire, the US will not be an honest guarantor of that ceasefire. And so, as you were pointing out, Israel seems to be getting itself in position with this notion that Hezbollah has to disarm or to move back. Is it functioning that way in practice on the ground? Is it the situation where Hezbollah has moved back or Hezbollah has disarmed, allowing Israel to get into a better position with this idea that at some point they're going to reinvigorate the war in a better position than they were previously?
Yeah, look, what the Israelis agreed upon is 1701, UN Resolution 1701, which is really a declaration of defeat from 2006, acceptance of defeat by the Israelis. And so why Hezbollah didn't make a big deal about it? Because if the Israelis, after 66 days, 67 days of bombardment of Lebanon, an attempted invasion, accept to go back to the status quo of 2006, that's another declaration of defeat by the Israelis.
I see. I see.
And so from a point of view of just let's look at what's written. Now, obviously, Hezbollah knows that the United States is a dishonest broker, and the French are colonial power, former occupiers of Lebanon again, and they gave the Hula Valley and much of the north of what is now Israel or Palestine before, it was a giveaway from France to the British occupation of Palestine in the 1930s. So they know that even the French are, would want to give away territory of Lebanon for the Zionist colony.
Right.
So Hezbollah is not they're not fools. They know that. But what they did now is that the little modicum of maybe respect that could have still been in some of the Lebanese population to France or the US is now gone because the country is still being invaded, and the French and the Americans are doing nothing. And the French, although they're making statements that are critical of Israel, counter to what the US, if we saw the spokesperson of the US government just yesterday, denying that there is any violation of sovereignty of Lebanon. But the French are saying openly that it is a violation. I don't think the Israelis can win through this quote unquote ceasefire what they couldn't win in a direct battle with Hezbollah. And Hezbollah is on the ground, did not move and will not move. And the Lebanese government and Lebanese army can't do anything about it, nor the UNIFIL. So at any moment right now, we will be back into full war.
Status quo,
Yes. The Hezbollah is also not going to wait for the coming of Trump to have American strategic bombers bombard the hell out of them. They are going to themselves go into the offensive, hopefully very soon.
Is that what they're thinking? That's what Trump is going to do? Like it's in their mindset when they're thinking of, okay, how is the landscape going to change the moment that Joe Biden leaves and Trump comes into office? They're thinking that Trump is going to get directly involved in the war.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the whole axis of resistance made some mistakes in their strategic analysis of what was going to happen once you begin the war for the liberation of Palestine. And they probably, I know I'm veering off a little bit there to get to the Trump point. But they thought that this was going to follow the traditional decolonization struggle trajectories, which is, what happened in Algeria, what happened in Vietnam, what happened in South Africa. You have a war of attrition as a weaker colonized people against the imperial or colonial power that lasts 5-6 years. There's usually 2 million martyrs of the population that's trying to achieve liberation. But in the end, there's a collapse of the colonial rule and the colonists leave. Okay? Well, that analysis doesn't work for the Zionist colony. Why? because none of those other struggles, like Algeria, South Africa, Namibia, Vietnam, were for territory that is so strategic as Palestine. There is no more strategic geopolitical position on this planet than Palestine. And for any empire that wants to call itself an empire, it has to hold this knot of communication and transportation to be able to project force over all of West Asia, East and North Africa, and East Europe. If you lose Palestine, the United States cannot project power anymore over those. It returns to being only able to project power through its natural territories. So the United States and the West are going to fight till the end for this. And similarly, the elite, let's say, that South African elite were not a crucial, integral part of the political system in the West. South African elite owned a few diamond mines. They didn't own the media in the West.
Yeah.
They didn't own the banks in the West. And, there's no way to decouple the Zionist elite from Western elites, as the decoupling, let's say, happened of the South African elite. Okay? So this miscalculation, because they calculated that way, they went into a defensive posture of just let's absorb until the economy of Israel and the Western ability to supply it collapses. And what happened? All the political and military leadership of much of the axis of resistance was assassinated because of that. So now they need to, especially now that we're getting to this stage that Trump is going to get into power. He promised to make anybody and everybody pay hell if the Israeli prisoners of war are not released before his inauguration on January 20th. It's clear that Netanyahu will want to now open as much fronts as possible on his terms, as he did with Syria, and distract and overstretch the axis of resistance to be ready for Trump to come into power and bomb Iran on behalf of Israel. So if the axis of resistance stays in this defensive posture, we may find the Ayatollah assassinated. We may find the President Assad of Syria assassinated. We may find Abdel Malik al-Houthi of Yemen assassinated, and we may find a total destruction of Iran because of this defensive posture. They need to go on the offensive and make sure that the territory of the battle is not on the axis of resistance territories, but on imperial holdings like the Gulf, like the Zionist colony itself. Hezbollah needs to invade North Palestine. As the Wahhabi death squads can reach from Idlib to Aleppo in 2 days, well, the special forces of Hezbollah can reach Jerusalem in 2 days. This is how things, so yeah. I hope they go this way. Otherwise, we're all screwed, honestly.
No, I agree with you. Like, much of this has been reactive. The Hamas, the Aqsa flood on October 7th. Then you get Hezbollah firing missiles on October 8th. But it seemed like everyone was standoffish. It's strange. Iran doesn't respond until they're attacked. Syria, of course, is not responding because Syria is somewhat isolated and they've been weakened by war and sanctions for all of those years, this kind of dirty campaign waged against it. And Lebanon itself, as you pointed out, is not getting involved in regards to the military. Hezbollah seems to be isolated, fighting with Gaza. The Houthis come in, but the Houthis are so far away that it doesn't exactly translate. So I think I agree with you on this, that Israel has shown itself to be vicious and has not necessarily been satiated in regards to the blood that they've been consuming. And so this weight campaign doesn't seem to work. It seems to be allowing itself to be picked off by Israel. I agree with you on this. From your point of view, the Syrian conflict that's taking place right now, where you have had all of these terrorists, for lack of a better word, invade Syria out of the blue. From my understanding, part of the reason they were doing this is to basically another way to cripple Hezbollah, from the Israel point of view anyway, to prevent weapons and arms from being transferred into the resistance through Syria. Is that what's going on? And do you think, is that going to work, I should say? Will that cripple Hezbollah further?
We know now two things as facts. One is that last month the Emirati and Saudi regimes approached the President Assad and offered him a complete lift of sanctions and the siege on Syria in return for cutting the supplies of weapons to Hezbollah and the Palestinian resistance, and decoupling from the axis of resistance and Iran. And this is the same offer that the United States under Obama and Kerry gave to Syria in 2012 before they triggered the quote-unquote Arab Spring, the Arab Autumn, as I would call it. And also, it's the same offer that Condoleezza Rice and Bush gave to President Assad in 2004, 2005, after the invasion of Iraq. And in those three occasions, including this most recent, Syria rejected this offer. Syria has paid the highest price any nation can pay to defend Palestine and the resistance in the region. Those 500,000 Syrians that were killed over the last decade and a half were all martyrs for Palestine. The other fact that we know is that 2 months ago, less than 2 months ago, the Ukrainian intelligence, the Turkish intelligence, the French intelligence, and these Wahhabi Contras in Idlib met at Bab al-Hawa border crossing between Turkey and North Aleppo, where this plan was plotted with the Israeli approval, and the Ukrainian special forces came into Idlib through Turkey, and with them loads of drones, Ukrainian drones, but really they are Turkish drones manufactured in Ukraine under license. And they triggered this 2 hours after the speech of Netanyahu accepting the ceasefire in Lebanon. So, and the plan that they had was to occupy all the way to Homs. And Homs is, once you have it, you block basically the north route into Lebanon, into the Beqa Valley for weapons smuggling, and you start going up the mountains, the Qalamoun Mountains, and you can blockade Damascus from the rest of Lebanon. That was the plan in 2012, 2013, and the Syrian government and Hezbollah, fought a bone-crushing war in both the Al-Qusayr in Homs, which is kind of the mouth that opens into the Beqa Valley, and in the mountains between Beirut and Damascus on the Qalamoun Mountains so what they were trying to do is recapture those territories that they lost in that war, and that would have blockaded Hezbollah, of course. And once Damascus is cut off from any sea route also, the country doesn't exist, Syria, once you do that. You're muted.
Okay. No, I'm just thinking through that. I mean, so like you said, Syria has been one of those countries where it has taken a hit basically for that support. So how do you think this is going to turn out? I mean, were you surprised that they were caught so unaware, so off guard? And why do you think they were caught so off guard? I mean, I guess from my point of view, it's been a frozen conflict. And frozen conflict doesn't mean the conflict is over with. It means it's frozen. Is one of my guests pointed out it was the Astana agreements, that they believed that they had a deal, and because they believed they had a deal, that they pull back their forces. Um, Give me your take on this, just the entire context of what's happening in that regard. Or better yet, how do you think this is going to turn out? Apparently, there's conversations between Putin and Erdogan taking place either yesterday. I would imagine Putin feels like he was stabbed in the back on this. Or do you think it's perceived that way?
You see, I think Russia made a strategic mistake, just as the axis of resistance made that mistake of, calculating this as a traditional anti-colonial struggle.
Right.
Putin made the mistake of thinking that the prospect of a multipolar world and the goodies that BRICS can give to Turkey should be sufficient to draw Turkey away from NATO and the imperial military order. And that's a huge miscalculation because, Turkey doesn't only host a huge amount of American troops on the ground, but it also hosts American nuclear weapons.
Right.
Okay? And what can the BRICS and Russia offer to Turkey more than what the West is offering it? You can't compete. I mean, the West is telling Turkey, you can occupy Aleppo, you can occupy Mosul, you can take half of Syria and Iraq if you want to, with all their oil fields, and reimagine a Ottoman empire. You can they want even Turkey to take control of all the Turkic nations in Central Asia. The Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, all of that, all the way to the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, in Xinjiang, in China. And so it's a reimagination. The West is telling Erdogan, you can be the new Mongol horde, because this is originally Turks. There is no such thing as Turkey, by the way. Turkish people in Minor Asia, Asia Minor, came from Central Asia with the Mongol hordes. Okay.
Oh, I see. That's why you said that. Okay.
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Yes. So they're telling him you can have a new Khanate, not only a new Ottoman empire that never ruled Central Asia, but they're telling him you can have a new Mongol Khanate. Okay.
So Erdogan's motivation is territory. This belief that he can get parts of Syria. Because even in negotiation, when Putin was speaking to Pezeshkian, they pointed out Turkey has to be a part of this conversation. So even though, they know he stabbed him in the back, they know he broke the Astana agreements, he is still a fact of life that they have to work with. And so it's the thought that in his mind, he's going to get parts of Syria. He's going to be able to establish or take parts of Syria. Is that the thought?
Oh, yes. I mean, he has this project of Turkic civilization, and he has the project of Ottoman revivalism. And, he has a battle with Iran. This is why it's hard to understand the strategists in the axis of resistance or Russia, how they are making these mistakes. I mean, he has a battle with Iran specifically in control of the Levant, the greater Syria area. And given that Iran has support and influence over all the Shia populations in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, he's trying, the promise of Obama originally was that Turkey could have control of the Muslim Brotherhood and control all of the Arabic world. If all the republics, the Arab republics that escaped colonialism after World War II, are recaptured. And that plan failed because the Saudis and the Wahhabis saw themselves as and Israel with them, saw themselves as the legitimate rulers of the Arabic region, that they gave the most services to the empire over the last 80 years. And they revolted against Obama and unleashed the Wahhabi death squads across the Arabic world. That was kind of like the revolt within the imperial order, and or the ongoing civil war really within the imperial order between the liberal wing and the conservative wing, that is on the ground, showed in this at the edges of the empire as the battle between the Wahhabis and the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Zionists on one hand, and the Wahhabis or between the Obama the Democrats versus the Trump Republicans. Okay. So, you look at it now, and Erdogan is captured in his mind Aleppo, and they flew the Turkish flag over Aleppo.
Wow.
And so
Wow.
and you look at the Ottoman Empire, there was nothing important in what we now call Turkey except Istanbul. And then it was Aleppo and Mosul, the two cultural and commercial hubs. Okay. And his plan is to at least occupy Mosul in Iraq and Aleppo in Syria, to begin the reprojection of that Ottoman depth into the rest of the Arabic world.
What do you think the conversation between him and Putin was about? I would love to be a fly on the wall for that conversation. Meaning, I know the readout. I've read the readout in regards to what they say. This notion we believe in the territorial integrity of Syria. We want to get back to the territorial integrity of Syria. Erdogan is saying he has nothing to do with this. He knows nothing about it. I would argue his denial is somewhat an indictment because it's so ridiculous. Like, in his denial, he basically comes out and says he believes in the territorial integrity, but that he believes Syria needs to deal with the legitimate concerns of the population. He's insinuating that this is a civil war, and that the people who are literally chopping off heads, I have a video of them chopping off the head of a kid, that those are the Syrian civilians that have grievances with the government. Okay, that's outlandish, right? That is the way he's trying to play this, as if this is a popular uprising, that these are just citizens of Syria that don't necessarily like the Syrian government. This is outrageous, correct? I mean, and this kind of impugns this original argument of it being a Syrian civil war. Is it fair to say it was never a civil war?
Yeah, it was never a civil war, obviously. The Qatari Emir admitted after the end of 2016 that Qatar by itself spent $2 trillion arming and training and supplying the Wahhabi death squads in Syria.
Yeah.
So you could imagine how much the Saudis spent. If little Qatar spent $2 trillion, what did the Saudis spend? What did the Emiratis spend? What did the US spend? France, Germany, and so forth. So it was, in fact, up until this war now in Palestine, the war in Syria was the most expensive war per capita and or per territory that is supposed to be captured ever.
Yeah.
Okay, so something like $22 trillion were spent by the West in that war. And there is no civil war in Syria. It doesn't mean that there's no problems in Syria or that the
Right.
Syrian,
There could be protests.
Yes.
Right.
But an armed war with the most advanced armaments and machinery and drones and so forth, that's not an uprising or a civil war. You can't survive without this constant American imperial flow of weapons and money. And as we see right now, the Uyghur fighters, the Turkmen, Uzbek, Chechen, and even Pakistani British fighters are the spearhead in this attack on Aleppo, and the videos
Right.
are all out for everybody to watch them. There's, most of them speak every language on this planet other than Arabic.
Right. Right.
And so it can't this has been the same since the beginning of the war on Syria. The Iraq, for instance, and it lived the same situation, but in Iraq, something like 6,000 suicide bombers were from Saudi citizenship, nationality, that blew themselves inside Iraq.
Wow.
So you could imagine overall how this war is clearly a mercenary war. And you know what? You look at what Turkey is doing in Syria right now. It is the traditional way of war of even the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire didn't have a standing army. It had the Janissaries, which were slaves and mercenaries. Okay? And as we see, Turkey is still now working in that same modem, the Janissaries, of these enslaved and or mercenaries fighting its wars again.
Last question before I let you go, and I guess this is more of a big picture question. I look at this and I consider it a global conflict, and that each area is a front in that conflict, whether it's in Georgia and them trying to overthrow the government in Georgia with a Maidan 2.0, whether it's in Ukraine, where they're using proxies to try to, go after the Russian government, whether it's Taiwan, in an effort to this one China policy where they're getting rid of, or whether it's here in the Middle East with this battering ram of them trying to take down the Assad government to go after Russia and Iran. All of these conflicts originate in the same, let's say, from the same thing, this notion of trying to maintain control of Western power. Why do you think that this has gotten so aggressive now, this full court push by this kind of globalist hegemonic force of the West that seems, I would argue, losing its legitimacy, and for that matter, losing its power, not being able to show its power, for example, in Ukraine? Is this the birth of a multipolar world? Is that what's going on? Is that why they seem to have gotten desperate and spread out the battlefield in such a way, in such an overt measure? Give me your take on this. Or do you think I'm getting this wrong?
No, you're getting it perfectly right. In fact, I would argue that we're already in the midst of a world war. And the world war started with the war of Syria in 2012. And that was the first battlefield that you saw the Russians and the Americans jointly on. Okay. And the furthest point of the expansion of the empire was with the capture of a third of the territory of Syria and the capture of all of Ukraine with the Maidan. Okay. And since that point, the empire is retreating and losing territory. So lost all Donetsk and the Crimea and all of that, and lost the battle inside Syria, right? Okay, so we're seeing now the retreat. And so Syria was the first battlefield of the World War. None of the major actors want to admit openly that it's a world war. Otherwise, they will have to fight each other directly, not through proxies or on the battlefields of others. And they would end up using nuclear weapons if they openly declare it. The other thing about, the situation that we see playing out right now in Western Asia is, look, the original plan of the empire at the collapse of the Soviet Union was to take out its three main competitors left on the playing field, which were China, Russia, and the Axis of Resistance. And the original plan was destroy the Axis of Resistance in any Arabic countries, the republics that escaped colonialism after World War II, like Libya, Iraq, Yemen, all of that. And then once you have taken all the smaller pieces off the playing field, you can besiege China and Russia and then eventually attack them. But what happened is that the empire got stuck in the quicksands of the Arabic world, and the Arabic people are so stubborn, they're willing to die in mass, but never be slaves of another people, and they fought like hell. And the American empire was, instead of going with this, being able to achieve its plan in 7 years, or less, to do that, and then to rush to surround China and Russia, they were stuck there for 30 years. And in those 30 years between 1990 and now, China managed to become the #1 economic power in the world because it was not attacked, because it was able to spend money on infrastructure and building its nation instead of on weapons and a defense and war. And also Russia managed to come out of the the decade of nasty mafias that were beholden by the West with the coming of President Putin and reviving its military power. And so, although the US wanted to finish off the Arabs and the Muslims before they go to attack Russia and China, the clock was ticking. So they started the Ukraine war, even though they didn't finish the Axis of Resistance off. And they because of the time clicking, they can't wait. Even if they wanted to, they had no choice but to. But this, as we see, they're overstretched. They were not able to do two fronts. And as we see them now, they're gonna, with Trump, he's saying, let's stop the war in Ukraine, at least to get rid of the Arabs and the Muslims. Right. Put all our force on that, and then we can go deal with China and Russia. And that's what's happening. And Russia, if they're smart now, and I think they are, and China, they should put all their money and weapons into making sure the Axis of Resistance defeats the empire. Otherwise, they will find themselves standing alone.
Well, they do seem to be, Russia does seem to be putting forces in Syria, and they fired the guy that was in charge of the defense of Syria at this point. They seem to be getting more aggressive with it. Laith, man, thank you for this. I always appreciate you joining me. I always get something out of your explanation of the stuff, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. Laith Marouf.
Great to be with you tomorrow.
He's award-winning multimedia producer and media policy law consultant focused on issues of liberation and decolonization from indigenous nations to Arab peoples and building broadcasting capabilities for misrepresented and underrepresented communities around the world. Thank you, man. Be safe. You have a good one.
You too.
All right. I want to bring in my next guest. We are joined by the one and only Michael Maloof. Mike Maloof. There we are. Michael Maloof is a former senior security policy analyst in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, author, and regular contributing analyst on RT and other media outlets. He has nearly 30 years of federal service experience in the U.S. Department of Defense. How you doing this morning? You doing all right?
I'm great. I was up at doing a podcast this morning at 1:30 a.m.
1:30 in the morning. Wow.
Yeah, the person was in Moscow.
I remember they sent me to California to do the show. I mean, not to do the show, but it was covering the what is it? This of Americas, the Summit of Americas. Mm-hmm. And Mindy was like, "Yeah, I'm also going to need you to do your show." It's like, what? What do you mean do my show? It's like 4 in the morning or 3 in the morning or something like that, man. And it's like you do your show, then you have to get up in order to do the event that you're covering. why are they? And I remember one day Mindia was going to do that with Malik. And I was like, well, wait a minute. He doesn't have to do that. He's like, it's part of the job. Like, it's just what we do. It's
Yeah,
like,
of course.
okay.
Of course.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Just
Well,
like
it keeps you,
movement.
keeps you on your toes.
I know. I know, right? So I'm glad you could join me. I've been following the events that have been taking place in Syria, and they have been dramatic, to put it mildly. It seems that there are multiple reasons why they're taking place. Is it true right now that the Russians are sending forces into Syria in order to assist in the defense of Syria and the recapture of the territory that they lost?
I don't know about forces. I do know about the bombing, of course. I mean, that the bombing was almost instantaneous.
Yeah.
I don't think. I think because of the commitment to Ukraine, I doubt that that they would that the Russians would send in ground forces, and also they don't know the terrain. In term, I mean, the jihadists would know the terrain far better, and you got to look at the complexity of what we're dealing with here. This it has really put Erdogan and of Turkey on the spot, because he along with Netanyahu seem to have formed an unholy alliance for the moment.
Interesting, right? I mean, for all the
Yeah.
complaints about Ned, I mean, oh, he's Hitler, he's this, he's that, and then all of a sudden they seem to have found some level of agreement.
Well, it's as though Erdogan has to keep feet planted on both sides in order to maintain some kind of survival, rather than tilting completely Eurasian. Every once in a while, he's got to do something westward, and
Right, that's what it seems.
it's has it sufficiently riled up Putin? Probably not yet, because the need for Turkey and other endeavors is very, very important. I don't know if Putin's planning to have Erdogan removed, and still have Turkey's commitment. I haven't seen any hide or hair of that. However, they did have a chat the other day, and
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think it was a come to Jesus moment, but it sure almost sounded like it. And I guess Erdogan will probably try to tone things down immediately. But it's really Israel that's also involved in pushing this initiative in order to cut off supplies for the Hezbollah in Lebanon.
No, I agree with you on that. I guess I would love to have been a fly on the wall in that conversation between them two.
Oh,
I would
yeah.
imagine Putin was apoplectic over this. But what did you get?
He was not amused.
Yeah, to put it mildly, right? I mean, especially so. The reason why I asked about forces in, there were reports that they were, let's say, special units. They were going, like drone units or something like that. They were going to Ukraine. They were going to Syria in
Yeah.
order to assist the Syrians on the
Yeah.
ground. From your point
There
of
may
view,
be elements of special forces like that. I mean, inevitably, because you got to guide the ordnance and
Yeah.
for the attack. We have it in our own special forces. But I'm talking about combat forces. I don't think you're going to have regular combat troops introduced to the extent that it's happening in Ukraine. I think he has too much. Even Russia has a mobilization issue. You know, they still have to train them. They've got and they're on a roll right now. So they want to push even harder in the Ukraine. So I think that troops on the ground, except for maybe specialists for directing attacks, bombing attacks, will be the case for the Russians. I just don't see any massive Russian troops presence in Syria.
basically everything is spread out so thin.
Now there is the possibility that the Iranians may come in.
I saw that, and apparently the Iraqis are sending units. Apparently, also.
They may also bring in the Shia who are loyal to Assad. It's all for the preservation of the Assad regime, and this is an effort, a big push now to try to topple Assad, and I just don't think it's going to get that far. It will not be allowed to get that far.
Well, I guess the question will be, does the Syrian military have enough force to push them back? I mean, Laith was effectively saying, and I agree with him, that Turkey, from its point of view, wants parts of Syria.
Yeah,
Basically, they want to get its
yeah,
hands on elements of Syria. And for that matter, bring back in the refugees that are in Turkey from Syria. Also, basically, we're going to steal a plot of land and allow those people to go back to a certain plot of land under this notion that it's
yeah.
going to be new Turkey or an enlarged Turkey. Does Syria have enough strength, force to push those jihadists back? And also, combined with that, if Putin and Pezeshkian knows that these guys are being pushed by Turkey to do this, I mean, what is the conversation like? Because in one sense, you are fighting and killing this group that's backed by Turkey and the US. In another sense, you're having a conversation with Turkey over this group invading Syria. It's a weird juxtaposition of conversations that are taking place right now. What I mean, for one, what is the relationship between Putin and Erdogan? Are they frenemies in this case? And B,
Oh,
yeah, I'm asking too many questions. I'm sorry. It's complicated. Give me your take on this. Just
no, I think just by looking at it from this distance, that it appears that Er- Putin wants to bring this to a real fast closure. In terms of whether Syria has the troops, they're struggling,
yeah,
admittedly. Idlib and Aleppo province have always been a haven for a gathering point for the jihadists. It's a jump off point. Turkey is saying that it's really meant to establish a foothold to go after the PKK,
right.
and because they have bases there. But and I think ultimately what Erdogan is trying to establish is a buffer zone, and in the north and in the northwest of Syria, which would be the southeast of Turkey, but create that buffer zone so that the PKK doesn't spill on over. They tend to take refuge in Syria, but at the same time, Erdogan has pledged to maintain the Assad regime.
Right.
So here we go. I mean,
Astana agreements, right?
which day is it? Which Erdogan are we seeing today? You know, and he's making a thrust. He's seeing how far he can go. I think he'll only go so far, and I think with Putin bombing immediately, Russia's bombing the area. They've got a base there, Khmeimim Air Base, so they're going to be very, very protective of the investment that Syria that Russia has made in Syria over a long period of time. Plus, the Iranians are talking of bringing in troops, and I wouldn't rule out the possibility that Hezbollah, now that they have a ceasefire of sorts in Lebanon with Israel, they may start moving some of their forces on up in there to assist as well, as they did before. So
Yeah.
it's like, here we go again. And
Because
I think ultimately,
no, please finish. I'm sorry.
ultimately, I think Assad will survive.
Well, he clung to power like grim death last time in far worse situation. I mean, he was like on the brink of disaster before the Russians and the Iranians came in.
Yeah,
but he
that's right.
clung to power. So yeah, I agree with you. Like the situation was far worse then than it is now. Do you
Exactly.
agree with me that the Gulf states this time around is not for it? Like the first time around, a lot of money was being poured in by Gulf states to get rid of Assad. This was the conversation that Joe Biden had that time when he was on stage, basically saying all of this money was being dumped into the country to get rid of him. That's not really our world now, though. I mean, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, well, UAE, etc. Those states came out against what was taking place. So how does that change the dynamics on the ground, that they're for or against it, or does it affect it at all?
Well, I think since a lot has taken place since then, the Arab League has welcomed Syria back into the fold and all of
Right.
that. I think they've accepted Assad. They reckon, and also you got to keep in mind now that they were against Assad at a time when there was no diplomatic relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran. So
Right.
that's been reestablished. So I think they're trying to quell things generally in the region, the Gulf Arab states, and try to bring some stability back in, because I think the Israelis have done more than enough, instigated enough instability in the region to please anybody, and so I think that they're going to try to. I don't think they're going to be fully supportive of this effort. But this has U.S. backing. This has CIA backing and Mossad backing. Does that translate to Arab backing as well? Probably not. I think they don't. They're not going to. I think this, and I hope that this does not last much longer, because I think Putin's going to have to weigh in much more heavily with these leaders and have a very frank discussion.
I mean, but what can he see? I get the feeling that Erdogan is just somebody you have to live with. It's like a fact of life, like a force of nature of something.
He has his own designs. He has his own designs. He wants to rebuild a neo-Ottoman empire. He's made no bones about that. There's that. In fact, I saw a map one time published by Erdogan's during Erdogan's term here, that showed the northern part of Syria down to Aleppo was all part of Turkey once again. across to all the way into Iraq. That's the Turks for years have occupied northern Iraq and have refused to leave. And so I think they still maintain bases there. So I don't think they ever left, even though they claimed that they had an agreement to leave. But I don't think that's happened. I haven't heard that it's happened. So I think that Erdogan has his own designs. Plus, he wants to recast his influence into areas that, frankly, will conflict in terms of influence, Russian influence, into the Caucasus and into Central Asia. And when I used to do a lot of work out in the Central Asian countries, you could see the Turkic influence out there. And in fact, all of West China is Turkic. It goes back centuries. The influence of Turkey, and I think Erdogan has designs to recast that influence as it was centuries ago, and that's why you're seeing him being active once again in these regions. And I think he only goes so far as long as it doesn't slam into Putin's interests. But at the same time, he's not going to do anything that's going to. But he's still going to see how far he can go, and that's the impression I get with Erdogan. For example, he has become a partner in BRICS now. He wanted full membership, which would have tilted him even more toward the Eurasian perspective.
Well, do you think he's going to get it after this? I mean, like after doing this, does that somewhat burn any notion of his membership in the BRICS?
I don't think so. I think he just went to see how far he could push. Mm-hmm. He was basically told, knock it off. I think he's probably going to try and de-escalate a little bit. But once you get the elements on the ground started, unless you're going to be continually feeding their machine and supplies, because they had a lot of Western supplies, they had armor. They were very well organized. They were well trained, even though the Syrians are saying they basically have now stopped them. I think all that the Syrians want to do at this point is contain them, and so that they but may not have the horsepower to defeat them at this point. So otherwise, it begins to bang into Erdogan's interest for that northern portion of Syria that he's trying to establish that buffer zone in.
Is it fair to say that this is precisely why Russia is not going to accept the frozen conflict? For example, I believe, I don't remember which magazine, it might have been the Wall Street Journal, but they're reporting that there is talk about a deal whereby Zelensky or Ukraine gives up territory in order to end the war. And then if Putin doesn't play ball, that they will increase the amount of weapons and money that are apparently going to Ukraine. Now, this seems ludicrous to me. I mean, it's basically Joe Biden's formula. And the fact of the matter is there's only so far you can escalate, because at a certain point, you're going to end up in direct conflict with Russia, which is ultimately going to be a nuclear war. So give me your take on that. I mean, do you see, give me your take on that. I'm just going to start right there.
I think in terms of Ukraine, that sounds very similar to the original proposal that Kellogg and Fritz came up with as a proposal, as a solution for Trump.
Right.
I don't think Trump has bought into it entirely. He says he liked elements of it, of the proposal, even though they tried to make it sound like it was his proposal. Kellogg is now the special envoy for Russia, Ukraine, for Trump.
Right.
So I think he'll do variations. I think that was just you put something down on the table and then you start negotiating it. It was like a placeholder of, okay, here's a starting point. Let's go from there. But I think there's an acknowledgement of a frozen of Russia retaining the territories that it now has. They will not be accepted into NATO. That's a non-starter. That's actually one of the adamant points. Will that mean, however, that NATO countries will continue to arm? That's conceivable without making Ukraine a NATO member. It cannot be a NATO member under the existing rules because of the conflict and the standing conflict. That's why Georgia will never become, because you have Abkhazia and South Ossetia, which is now effectively annexed, and that's portions of Georgia, and Georgians want it back, but over time it's been so diluted of Georgians that even though they want that territory back, but here again it's and you have this crisis that's developing now within Georgia itself, which is favoring Russia, given the existing the opposition in Georgia is rebelling, and there could be a potential for civil war there. So
I want to get to Georgia in a moment, because that's another place I've been fascinated by. But from my point of view, all of these things are part of a global conflict that is acknowledged.
It's all related.
All of this stuff is being powered and paid for by the exact same brain trust, this kind of Western hegemonic control of the globe.
It is all designed to isolate Russia and even attempt to topple the government there ultimately.
Before we get to Ukraine, before we get to Georgia, though, where is Ukraine on the battlefield right now? They seem to be losing territory, even according to the New York Times. They're losing it faster than they were prior, basically meaning every day they're getting weaker and weaker and losing more and more territory. There was also reporting that in Kursk, they are just in dire circumstances, and that Zelensky is trying to hold on to every patch of land that he can get his fingernails into, with the belief that if Trump comes in and there are negotiations, that they can exchange that land in Kursk for, I don't know, something else, maybe his own territory back. I mean, for one, I don't really believe that Russia's going to negotiate on anything in Kursk, they're either going to kill everybody or they're going to get pushed out. But from your point of view, how do you view this? I mean, how long can the Ukrainian military keep this up? What's your thoughts?
Well, I think even U.S. Strategists question the move by Ukrainian forces into Kursk. Mm-hmm. What are they going to hold on to? And if it was for a bargaining chip, well, as you pointed out, the forces have been surrounded, and they will probably all be killed off. And a lot of those forces, where their top-notch fighters, siphoned off from their Donbass front. And now that's weakened, and that's what's allowed the Russians to move even quicker. And I think I haven't heard of any more long-range ATACMS hitting Russian targets recently.
There have been, though. I mean, let me say it this way: there have been more since the Rezhnik. But I agree with you. I haven't necessarily heard.
Not in recent days.
Right.
They're either running out or they got the message with the Orezhniks, because what Putin is doing is ratcheting up the intensity. Right. And he's now threatened swarms of Orezhniks using conventionals, each of which carries 8 to 10 warheads. They will all still be conventional warheads, but that would be devastating on any given area. And he's promised to not only hit Kyiv, the areas of the leadership, but also the infrastructure, particularly the electrical and energy infrastructures. And it's coming at a time when it is getting cold there. When I was in Moscow just a few weeks ago, it was cold. It was below freezing already in Moscow. So, and we had some snow. So it's going to be I think it's going to be a tough winter there.
Yeah. Wow. I guess my thing is, how long can that military keep going on like this? I mean, I was talking to Ritter the other day, and he pointed out, he says, under normal circumstances, military is, when they're losing heavy percentages like that, they sue for peace. And in Ukraine's case, because it's not really Ukraine that's running this thing is being run by people who don't really care about Ukraine, then they just keep going, even to the point of now bringing in kids into the battlefield.
18-year-olds,
that is astonishing. Well, I call them kids just because I'm, late 40s. From my point of view, 18 years old is a teenager. That's pretty astonishing. And is that going to have any impact on the battlefield at all?
No, it's not. These are inexperienced. They are kids. They're not hardly trained. He's throwing in. And he's doing it at the urging of the United States. Draft your 18-year-olds now. They're already drafting pregnant women, so it's astonishing what they're having to resort to, and it's become pathetic to see how the Ukrainians are responding. Where's the dignity that they want to have left? In this, they ought to be able to say, okay, we've had enough, and let's sit down and seriously negotiate. But they're being pushed constantly by the United States. You have the Biden administration, and you heard Sullivan the other day saying that he's been tasked to unload billions more into Ukraine. But it's my understanding that a lot of that money is going to be nothing more than money laundering for the Ukrainians. And so it's a question whether they're going to be getting weapons as such. They wouldn't be able to handle the deluge, and also the Russians know where the stockpiles are. They're destroying them with their with hypersonic missiles all the time. So also, I mean, when you have a batch of ATACMS going up in smoke in the supply depot, I mean, that's costly to the Ukrainians.
Also, who's going to carry those weapons? I mean, like, they already have this massive manpower shortage. Zelensky is trying to argue that the number of deaths are under 100,000. And it's like, okay, dude, you had 1 million-man army at one point. You are literally down to the point where you don't have enough people to carry the rounds. I'm curious, is there any room, let's say Trump gets in and he does want to end the conflict. Is there really any room for compromise? I mean, truth be told, the U.S. lacks credibility in this. There were mixed agreements 1 and 2 that were completely blown off. There was the Istanbul agreements that were completely blown off. All of the treaties, meaning the INF treaties and everything else, have been completely blown off, basically ended. Even if you wanted to come in, find an end to this, is there room in negotiation? Meaning what? Because I would imagine Donald Trump, like anybody else, would need a face-saving mechanism, something to say, okay, this is what I got in order to end this war. Does that exist? And how can the Russians even trust the US on this? That the next administration, just like we won't move an inch to the east, those type of proclamations, those type of promises that are fundamentally ignored the moment that another administration comes in. So how is there room for compromise in this? And how can Russia nail down that any deal that's made will be honored?
I think from my take in talking to some Russian officials when I was in Moscow a few weeks ago, they don't trust even the incoming Trump administration.
Sure.
Under their experience, they suffered more sanctions and had their properties in the United States confiscated. They own them. They paid for them, confiscated. So they're very, very leery of Trump. However, they want to wait and see. They hear rumblings of cutting off of the flow of funding and weapons to Ukraine. So I think that's why you're seeing Putin being more measured in his approach, and he's not just going all out. He's not, he's, even though he has threatened Western countries for aiding and abetting the Ukrainians because of the attackums, because they require Western support, intelligence and guidance and all that. So it's to their targets. So notwithstanding, he's been measured in his comeback. I think he's taken a wait and see approach with Trump. What does Trump offer? I think Putin is talking from a position of strength right now, and the last thing in the world that Trump would want is to get into a confrontation with the Russians. I think also that they can work out something. You have Putin making a very strong suggestion that maybe you might to Putin or to Trump's people that maybe you might want to reactivate the intermediate range ballistic missile treaty, for example, and because when you abrogated it the first time on your own, you made the area more dangerous. So maybe it can become a talking point. Ukraine will become nothing more than a pawn, if you will, in a larger negotiation, I think, between the United States and Russia for better terms and maybe in a number of other areas. But as far as Ukraine is concerned, I think the United States is basically going to concede that the properties, the territories that have been annexed are going to remain Russian, and that there will be no NATO membership, although the U.S. could continue to look out for their basic defense needs. Defense, not offense. You see, the Ukrainians are not capable of mounting major offensives. They're not only not trained for that, they don't have the manpower or the equipment or the technology or the infrastructure to support it, and especially against Russia. Who are you kidding? It's another case of from the Biden administration where we're always told, don't believe your lying eyes. Well, I can see it. We can see it for ourselves. You're losing. If you continue on, you're not going to have anything left. And because you also have countries such as Poland, Lithuania, that won ancient territories back. Galicia, for example, in the west of Ukraine, that the Poles have their eye on that area once again. I mean, they're gonna tear Western Ukraine apart.
Okay, I want to move to Georgia. I'm curious on another point. Does Russia want to be flush with a NATO country, or do they want Ukraine as a buffer? I imagine they would prefer him as a buffer, right? Like,
Yeah.
meaning they wouldn't want Poland or any of these other countries invading Ukraine because what they want is Ukraine to be neutral.
They want Ukraine to remain non-aligned.
Right.
What's left of it. Yeah. And it's still vast in comparison. It's still a large amount. Yeah, they want that. They don't want another NATO country banging up. And
At the
also,
border. Yeah.
Ukraine is different from other countries than Poland, because these are Russians regard the Ukraine as basically as Russian. I mean,
Yeah.
most of the area was, it was all Russia. It was the Russian Republic back in 1905.
Right.
There was no Ukraine back then.
Yeah. Lenin came in like a bomb.
And as far as Georgia is concerned, the government in place right now is much more sympathetic to Moscow. And I think that they are cracking down on the opposition.
Well, they have to.
They have to, yeah, and they have defied the U.S. And the U.S. is basically now thinking of sanctioning the members of the Ukrainian of the Georgian parliament to even come to the United States,
which is astonishing. I mean,
it's a reversal. Yeah, they used to be a top ally.
Well, yeah, but when they were passing the FARA law, this was when I started to take interest, because my thing was like, well, wait a minute, we have a FARA law. How are you complaining about their FARA law? And it's like, okay, so the only reason you really complain about that is because you want to dump money into the country without the country and the government being unaware, meaning you want to undermine the current government that's there. And so the complaint is, oh, well, they're passing a FARA law. This is getting them further away from Europe. So
what it does is it was the United States' way of funneling funds through the NGOs there unnoticed, in order to undermine the existing the current government, which is more sympathetic to Russia. But at the same time, look, the U.S. is in charge of the rules-based order. That means they not only make the rules, they can break the rules. I mean, we have a FARA law. You're absolutely right. And just because they do it, it exposes their shenanigans. Basically, that law exposes U.S. And Western shenanigans through the NGOs, and they don't like that transparency. That's all it boils down to, because there's accountability now on how much funding is going to the NGOs. They are fronts for the extension of U.S. policy. We're also seeing that in Armenia. We're seeing it in Azerbaijan. So, and this is an effort by the United States to get a firm placehold in the Caucasus, assuming that they can also take out Iran, and in that way absolutely contain Russia. That's the whole concept.
What they don't seem to get, or what they don't seem to care about, is that the very act of them doing that is pushing them further away from Europe. Meaning it's almost like Europe is giving them the justification because of the way Europe is behaving. I was listening to one of the speeches by Rutt, I believe, and he made the speech about Georgia, democracy, and he conflated democracy with getting closer to Europe. So the only way that they can really be moving in a democratic way is to ignore the democratic election and blow it off and move closer to Europe. It's just an astonishing speech.
And you see, the Georgians went against what the EU wanted with this FARA law, and as a consequence, they have suspended any further discussion of Georgia joining EU at this point. They've been trying, like Turkey, forever to get in. It just isn't happening. But you see, the Europeans don't want a free trade arrangement through Georgia, because that may introduce the Iranians into to come in, because the Iranians and the Georgians have a free trade relationship now, and if it extends into Europe, there's that avenue into Europe by the Iranians. So that's something that they're watchful of, and so they're always moving the goalposts, if you will, toward final approval of EU membership. And the same thing happened with Turkey.
But in this case, they are angry at them because they're not getting closer to the EU. So it's weird, right? It's like they are out at the door knocking and the EU doesn't answer. But the moment that the government becomes Eurosceptic, and as you said, it's not that even that they love Russia, it's just that they're not antagonistic to it. They're just not belligerent. At that point, EU comes in and says, hey, I can't believe you don't want to be close to us. Why don't you want to be closer to us? How are you getting close to it is a bizarre thing that they're doing. The Prime Minister has said this would not be another Maidan 2.0, which means he is fully aware that Ukraine was overthrown. Meaning the only reason he would say that is if he fully understands it. You even had baked goods being given to the violent protesters out in front of Parliament. I guess there are two questions on this. One, do you think this is going to work? I guess let's start with that.
No, I think that the Georgians will do what they want. You got to keep in mind that the whole Maidan movement in Ukraine began because the then democratically elected government in Ukraine had rejected joining the EU and turned instead to the Eurasian Economic Union under Putin.
It was that's a free trade agreement or something. Yeah,
and it absolutely flipped out the Western forces, and particularly the Victoria Nulands, and it meant that they had to get rid of and overthrow the democratically controlled government. That's what happened in 2014. So you see, people don't know that history to understand why it's so volatile in that region today, and why Russia has reacted the way it has because of its own security. It can't go anywhere. It can't go halfway around the world like the United States does. You don't see Mexico and Canada threatening to come in to invade the United States.
Right.
But on the other hand, you have creeping NATO alliances coming in more and more surrounding the Federation, and that's what Putin's recoiling against, and he's warned about it constantly. He's said these are red lines. Mm-hmm. We ignore them, and he takes action as a result. And I doubt that the West has still gotten the message.
Tucker Carlson. Oh no, please go ahead. I thought you were finished.
No, I'm finished.
Tucker Carlson is in Moscow once again.
Right.
And he is apparently talking to Sergei Lavrov. I'm fascinated by Tucker Carlson. There are many points of view of his that I may not necessarily like, but the one view I do like is his willingness to talk to anybody. His point of view is we're at the brink of war. Nobody is having conversations about this stuff. We need to understand the other side and why they're doing what they're doing. He is absolutely right. And he's going to be hit for it, but he is absolutely correct. Give me your thoughts on it.
No, I agree with you. There has been no negotiation. There has been no, we haven't had any indication that even Trump's people have talked to Russian officials.
Right.
There would have been a leak in Washington by now if there had been. So I doubt that's transpired. Trump has promised to talk to Putin, but I go back to what I said earlier, that it was under Trump that Russians suffered the greatest sanctions, and they remember that, even though Trump was probably reacting to the internal charges of Russian collusion, and it was trying to overcome that to no success. And I think it's going to be a different story. I think that Putin, in his strategic thinking, is saying, okay, I'm going to wait and see. And that's why I think he's biding his time on Ukraine and not going full bore. And he's giving the Ukrainians a chance to bail without just sweeping the place and destroying the whole place. He knows he can't occupy it all because of the resistance that would occur, but he could ultimately destroy the whole place, and he's not doing that yet. So I think he's been measured, and he's certainly not looking to Europe to attack.
Well, at this
no
point,
evidence.
Yeah. The last question. We have about 4 minutes left. I want to get your take on this, just because you have been a contributing analyst to RT, Sputnik, etc. And there was this conversation where somebody came up, I believe it was Crystal Ball, said something about Tim Pool working with that organization. And I played the clip of Ed Schultz. Ed Schultz was on MSNBC. He moved over to RT, and he was talking about how he didn't feel like he was being pushed. He had more freedom on the Russian network to basically speak his piece. RFK Jr. said the same thing. And I felt that way, meaning when I was on the network, we didn't get pressure. We got basically to give our point of view. And you had people all across the board on the right and left with their points of view. Have you been shocked at the degree to which the government has got involved in regards to limiting or adding censorship to speech, especially when we're getting around this notion of war? And from my point of view, you need to have honest context, because the public itself needs to be able to come to a conclusion, not be pushed into a conclusion. And I often feel that part of the way that they get us into these wars is by giving us a biased point of view that pushes people into a certain context. Have you been shocked at the degree to which the U.S. government has gotten involved in trying to limit free speech, even from the Ministry of Truth, those type of organizations, Hillary Clinton saying people need to be put in jail for misinformation, the queen of misinformation, Kamala Harris saying something needs to be done with Twitter, or even John Kerry saying the First Amendment is a problem? I am terrified by this. Give me your thoughts on this.
Well, I agree with you. This is very dramatic. It's out of the Democrat side and it is a creeping form of trying to whittle away our First Amendment. They've been trying to do that with our Second Amendments. It is because it's all about, for the Democrats, it's all about power and control. We're involved in a propaganda war. There's no question about it. I don't know why, for example, RT America and Sputnik US checked out. I have no idea. They could have fought it, because there is a First Amendment in this country. When you look at read the U.S. Constitution, it says there will not be nothing to abridge freedom of the press. They didn't say whether it's corporate owned or whether it's government owned. They just said the press. And so it's to me, there was too much capitulation here. Maybe they just didn't want to get into a food fight.
I don't know why they did fight it. I thought the exact same thing. I thought the government was doing an end run around the First Amendment. And
it is.
Yeah.
And you see, this is what, even though you may still have the First Amendment on paper, if you don't exercise those rights, you're going to lose them because of this constant chipping away by people such as Hillary Clinton and John Kerry, because they ultimately, what it means is that it's interfering in their ability to maintain power and control. And now they've really lost it for now. But I'm confident, however, that the Republicans will screw up and somehow it'll revert back, and people will soon forget just how awful the Democrats were in 2024.
That is what Nancy Pelosi said herself. So I can't disagree with you. Michael Maloof, man, thank you for this. I always enjoy these conversations. I really do. Michael Maloof.
Thanks for having me.
He's a former senior security policy analyst in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, author, and regular contributing analyst on RT and other media outlets. He has nearly 30 years of federal service in the Department of Defense. You have a great day, sir. Thank you for this.
You too. Thank you.
All right. I want to go to our next guest. We're joined with the man himself, Garland Nixon. Garland Nixon is he was Sputnik political analyst and co-host of the Critical Hour. He is now, I would imagine, a contributing analyst, and you have your own YouTube channel. Is it under your name, Garland?
Yes, it is. Yep.
Excellent. So definitely check out Garland Nixon. I saw you yesterday, I believe. I think you were interviewing Ritter, or it was another military guy. So, man, how you doing today? You doing all right?
Doing wonderful.
All right, let's do the news. I have a pet peeve that I want to start off with. So Crystal Ball And I did this show yesterday because it annoyed me so much. I was in bed at literally got up at 1 in the morning to talk about it because it bothered me that much. So Cristobal was having a conversation with Cenk Uygur. I imagine you know these people. Uygur was the one that ran Young Turks. Cristobal at one point used to be on MSNBC. She eventually transferred over to her own show to Rising, and then she eventually got her own show. All right. She comes on and she says this about Tim Pool, but she effectively attacks Tim Pool. Now, I'm not a fan of Tim Pool, but I feel like I am defending myself in defending Pool on this because I find it to be egregious, especially for a lefty. This is Cristobal. Listen to what she says here when she goes after Tim
than the mainstream press.
I totally disagree with you. So the mainstream media guys are the worst liars in the world. They lie way worse than even right-wing media.
I don't know about that.
Okay, we can have that discussion. I think you cannot find two bigger liars in America than Joe Scarborough and Whoopi Goldberg.
I mean,
okay?
But I hear you, but I also have been kind of blackpilled on a lot of independent media because that tenant media situation where, Tim Pool and whoever else were taking random sketchy money to put out whatever propaganda they were told to put out. I just, I don't.
Okay. That didn't happen that way. Yes, Tim Pool was working with that tenant media company, whatever they were called. The Russians put in $20 million. Again, stupid, waste of money. Fair enough. But they didn't know that. Meaning Tim Pool's content and their content, even though they're right-wingers, I don't like their points of view, all that's fine. But it was their point of view, and it was a point of view espoused by plenty of Americans. They were out there, and she's making they were just pumping propaganda from the Russians, which is the veiled talking point that she's effectively using here. And she goes after them, as I point out, they didn't know. And it's a bit rich that she's doing this, considering she was on MSNBC and was a shameless propagandist for the Democratic Party. Admittedly so, because I can play you the clip where she pointed out how her speech was being corralled, where she had a monitor, where she self-censored as a result of the pressure that they were putting on her. And it's like, okay, well, you're self-censoring for who? For a network that is an appendage of the U.S. government. You're effectively functioning as state media when a Democrat is in office. Am I being too belligerent in this? It annoyed me deeply, and I get it. I'm defending myself on this because I feel like attacks like that are also the same attacks that can be levied at me for my service at Sputnik, something that I am deeply honored by, meaning I love that job. And I was proud to do that job because I felt like I had the ability to be honest. I can give my take. Give me your take on this. Am I overplaying this? Am I investing too much into this?
I think you hit on something important here. This is an important discussion, particularly in these times, because what we see is the mainstream media. And the mainstream media is clear and obvious because they have certain guardrails. They have to say certain things about Hamas and certain things about Israel and certain things about Ukraine. And we know there's certain things they have to say, certain positions they have to take. Okay. Then there's what we call the alternative media, and that may be me or you or the Duran or maybe Jimmy Dore, whoever there's some conservatives. There are people who are out there saying things that they think and believe that would be, poo-pooed by the mainstream media as evil Russian propaganda or pro-terrorist or whatever, right? Okay. So you've got an alternative media and you've got a mainstream media. But then you got the crystal balls, in my opinion, and the whatever you pronounce, Cenk Uygur, whatever, okay, who seem to me that they want to kind of, the old saying, they want to run to second base and keep one foot on first. Yeah. You know what I mean? They want to be seen as the alternative media. But at the same time, they don't want to step too far out or over the line and say things that are so completely unacceptable in the mainstream media that they won't ever have a hope of coming back in there. of being part of that system. You know what I mean? Like they're holding out hope that maybe Crystal Ball and Sync seem like they're holding out hope that maybe the mainstream media will feel so bad that it'll reach back out and grab them and pull them back in and say, you guys come back to MSNBC and CNN and you can be, and so that they can, so you know what I mean? Like they're trying to be viewed as alternative media, but they don't want to go straight too far from the mainstream media because hopefully one day they can get back there. Right. And so it's the alternative media who are like, screw the mainstream media. We make our statement is we're going to say what we want. We don't care what you like it. And we believe it to be true. We'll say it. And if we change our mind about something and say, you know, I really thought that, but now I found something different. So I've taken another position. Right. Yeah. We're going to be what we're going to be. And we're going to say what we think, but we're not trying to get back in there. And that's what I think. I think when you hear a discussion between two people like that, there's their discussion, but Crystal Ball still has to play the Russiagate game. You know what I mean? She can't stray too far. She can't say, well, that Russiagate crap was all lies. Because you'll never get back in the mainstream media if you say that. So she still has to play the Tim Pool or whoever is a Russian bot. She can't get into the details of that. Well, he didn't know, so he wasn't. And I believe I still don't trust that story. Yeah, because every story I've ever seen about Russiagate was a fraud. Right. Well, every single time was a fraud when you dig down inside of it. And I think that if you dig down into that story and they say the Russians gave $20 million, I have to ask, did it come from the Russian government? Did it come from a Russian media company that thought maybe they could get into Western media and make money? Who specifically, where did that money come from? Because in the past, we'd hear the Russians ran a social media operation, and we find out that it was a Russian company, and that that was 6% of what they did. That they were just another clickbait company, but they were able to say the Russians and imply that it was the Russian government, that it wasn't. So again, you get my point. There's a lot of bullcrap going on here, and I don't trust those kinds of people because they're trying to still be part of this mainstream media that they're allegedly attacking or pushing themselves away from.
No, I perfectly accept that. And you're right. Those like internet research organization, internet research something. It was a private company that was a profit-making company that was following the flow of the election, putting out like buff Jesus things. I mean, half of the things took place after the election, and they acted like this was somehow comparative to Hillary Clinton $1 billion campaign. Like, it's just outlandish. So I agree with you. I guess my feeling on this is that even if they did, meaning even if it was a situation where they put in $20 million and wasted $20 million, they didn't know. Like, it was like they didn't know. And it's like, I feel like going after him for this is a throwaway, but B, on some level, is an indictment of us for something that we didn't do. It's like, I went out.
It's completely a lie. She's being dishonest.
I went out, we did our job, and our job was to be honest. And as I pointed out, the federal government has gotten so fundamentally dishonest that just being honest impugns and goes after him. I don't know. It just bugged the hell out of me.
I'm with you, but Crystal Ball was this, and she was playing that game dishonest. It was, yes, they were paid to do this. Whoa. Paid to do this implies exactly what you said.
Yes.
They were paid and they were told to say certain things. If I find out that,
and by the way, Crystal Ball was. On Ed Schultz was very clear that MSNBC was telling people what they should say. And Crystal Ball herself came out and said she did a video on Hillary Clinton, and they called her in and put a monitor on her for videos on Hillary Clinton, and that she self-censored. She said, I wanted to be a truth teller, but hey, I'm a person. Okay, so, how are you hitting that guy for something that you yourself is guilty of?
Here's my question. When she's online, if somebody gives them a super chat, if somebody is Patreon for them or not, do they research to see where it came from? What happens if you find out that one of their Patreon people or somebody that sent them a super chat for $100? What if you find out that they're Russian? Well, you
obviously,
didn't
everything
know
is
they were
yeah.
Russian. You accepted the super chat. Can I now say, well, Crystal Ball's paid by, I mean, the Russians are telling her what to do, when in fact she didn't know who sent her that super chat. So
Well,
if
according to
you get
Crystal Ball,
donations or anything else from someone and you don't even know they're giving you the money, it is extremely dishonest to imply that there's some kind of a relationship between you and that person.
right there.
It's
Perfect.
absurd.
Yeah,
And she
perfect.
knows it. She knows it.
I don't know. It's just aggravating to me. Just deeply aggravating to me. A sore spot, I suppose.
Yeah.
I want to play another thing. So, among people who don't know that they're lying, or that they should know that they're lying, I am fascinated by Democrats' defense of Joe Biden pardoning Hunter Biden. So let's start with that first. Give me your take on Joe Biden doing this. I knew he was lying. I don't know why anybody else thought he was telling the truth on this. It's his kid. He's certainly not going to let his kid go to jail when he has nothing to lose. But give me your take on Joe Biden doing this.
You know, I'll put it like this. I'm with you. If he'd have just said, well, he's been found guilty of this and I'm going to pardon him of that. Okay, yeah, look, it's your son and I understand. And we know your son's a crackhead. And, you know, even though we all know it's wrong for you to do that, you got the power to do it. And you're in DC and nobody's going to be shocked that you pardoned your son. Okay, there's all the hypocrisy. But here's what's interesting. The nature of his pardon. Going all the way back to January 1st of 2014, the indictment is not that he pardoned his son. The indictment is that he pardoned his son back to a date. Now, what were we told? Hunter didn't do anything wrong in Ukraine. Joe Biden wasn't the big guy getting 10%. That was somebody else clearly that Hunter was referring to, right? He pardoned himself. And what he did was he just really told everybody right out in the open, yes, all those accusations that were made about my son and I in Ukraine were true, because and the overthrow of Ukraine, all of those things were true because I had to go back 10 years just to the very date, a month before we overthrew the government of Ukraine. That's the date we're going to start.
All right.
He pardoned himself.
10 years. Oh, that's a good point.
He pardoned himself.
Oh, that's such a good point. Your point is, this is not entirely about Hunter. This has to do with the way, because influence peddling, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, is more sophisticated than this kind of cartoonish, I'm writing you a letter to bribe you for so and so. If Hunter Biden has dinner with his business associates, which he did, and Joe Biden is sitting there as VP, okay, well, that's called heft. And that shows on some level that whatever Hunter Biden was telling people, that the president or the VP is there, he can deliver it. And so Joe Biden's name and persona was being leveraged for these business deals. When he's like, I'm sitting here with my father, and if you don't give me $20 million, all of the people that my father know are going to be mad at you. Okay, well, Hunter Biden doesn't have that clout. Nobody gives a damn about Hunter Biden being mad at him. They may care if they're a businessman about Joe Biden being mad at him, which immediately fuses this idea of government and private interests that Joe Biden is saying didn't fundamentally exist. Give me a take on that.
Well, yes. And here's the thing about it. There was this guy, I forgot his name, but there was and you can go online and read it. This like investigative intake document from the FBI, where this guy came forward. You probably remember it. And he said, Joe Biden bribed us and we gave millions to Hunter and Joe. And he said, and we've got tapes and we've got other things, if you remember that. And after he did that, the FBI arrested the guy. The FBI arrested the guy and locked up and charged the guy who said, I got evidence that Joe Biden's a criminal. Oh, you do, huh? Yeah, well, there we go. We grabbed you and we were going to put you away, pal. You're going to jail. Okay, so my point is, so it's clear there's evidence out there, or Joe Biden is horrified that there's evidence out there that he was involved in criminal activity. However, the way to get to it would be to go through Hunter, arrest Hunter, and then say, okay, Hunter, you got to tell us all these things. And then they may be able to bring Joe in and ask him and other family members and other people. So now Hunter won't be investigated. Hunter won't be looked into. Hunter won't have to answer questions, all this kind of stuff. And so he really pardoned his family influence operation. But back to 2014, 10 years. Oh, by the way, nobody's against the law. I mean, nobody's above the law. Nobody's above the law. Remember that? You know, it so discredits every moral position that the Democrats have taken against Donald Trump. Every moral position. Remember this? Donald Trump's a liar and a criminal. And Joe Biden's a decent guy.
Yep.
He's a decent guy.
We believe in the law.
We believe, yes, the rule of law, all this moral, self-righteous, pious posturing that they've been doing. Joe Biden exposed it all just like that. When Donald Trump comes in, he's got a free hand. If I'm Donald Trump, the January 6th bill, everybody that I could possibly think of, I would pardon everybody for everything. Why wouldn't he? What are the Democrats going to say? We believe in the rule of law. Nobody's around. That dog ain't hunting no more. Boy, you talk about a free hand for Donald Trump to pardon anyone, anything he wants to do, he can do. And now what can they say? Well, Donald Trump, now the Supreme Court ruled that he can't be held accountable. All that crap is gone. They exposed. Good. Thank you, Joe Biden. You exposed the reality of the hypocrisy and the absurdity of the Democratic moral posturing.
And it's a weird thing that both political parties are now impugning the justice system. Both of them are saying that the justice system is a fraud, that they're politically motivated. Like, that's the Joe Biden. I get it, right? It's a dad that pardoned his kid. But they have to admit that this was deeply cynical for the exact reason that you mentioned. Like, Joe Biden was like, well, my son, I'm proud of him. I'm going to follow the justice system. I'm not going to get involved. I have clip after clip after clip of Joe Biden's like, I am not going to pardon my son. Karine Jean-Pierre, the press secretary, who's historic, according to her, 8 minutes of her saying, Joe Biden is not going to pardon his son. Joe Biden is not going to pardon his son. Clips, oceans of videos of these people on CNN and the other media. Joe Biden is not going to pardon his son. He's such a great man for not doing that. It's cynical. And then I want to get your take on the responses. Like, Whoopi Goldberg came out and was like, well, I don't consider it a lie. It's like, okay, that's outrageous. And why don't you consider it a lie? Because he's on crack. And, Trump wasn't on crack. And so Trump committed crimes. So this is worse. And it's like, Whoopi, that is not a defense for it being a lie. Whoopi Goldberg is out crazied by this goofball on CNN. I want you to listen to what she says here, because it's pretty astonishing. Because in the process of arguing that Joe Biden wasn't lying, she flagrantly lies. Let's play this clip.
A lie, because honestly, what the other side has been saying for years, what you guys ran on for president, was multiple lies. I mean, if Eric Holder said it right, I think he said if Hunter's name was Joe Smith, this case would probably have never even gone to trial, right? That it was always a political witch hunt, and it was always.
But wasn't, to Scott's point, I mean, wasn't it a lie? I mean, you can defend it, but wasn't it a lie that he was not going to pardon him?
No, I believe the circumstances have changed. I think that we now have a president coming into office who's talking about firing squads, who's talking about running people around the country and making sure that everyone who's his enemy is going to be punished. And Hunter Biden lied about his drug use on a government forum when he was buying a gun, and he failed.
That is outrageous. She said, I don't think it's a lie because circumstances have changed and that the new administration wants firing squads. Now, the firing squads thing goes back to the Liz Cheney thing where Donald Trump was trying to argue anti-war position, saying, I'm sick of these wars. We spent $10 trillion. We didn't get anything for the $10 trillion that we spent. These wars need to stop. If Liz Cheney had to go out there and fight, if you put a gun in her hand and fighting these other people, if her life was in danger, she would think differently. Now, they took an anti-war conversation and flipped it to Donald Trump wants to shoot Liz Cheney in the face with the firing squad. Give me your take, Garland.
A couple of things. realistically, and listening to the babble, the mindless prattle that was coming out of her, it doesn't matter what she was saying. You know what I mean? It wasn't a matter of what, it was a matter of who. Joe Biden or a Democrat said it, so it wasn't wrong. If a Republican said it, it would be wrong. That's number one. I think number two, and I don't see Jamaro, but hopefully he'll be back soon. Yikes. Oh, there you go. You were going for a second.
I give you a solo.
Oh, okay, good. Oh, okay, good. So the bottom line is this. She's just an apparatchik for the party. So I understand her job is to come on and say the Republicans are bad, Trump, Trumpity Trump, and therefore it doesn't matter. But again, it misses the point. Okay, here's what I would say. Number one, I have issues with the charges against Trump. I mean, against
Hunter. Yeah,
Hunter in the first place, because to me, there's a Fifth Amendment issue there when the government says, I want you to fill out this form and say whether or not you've done something that's a crime. Which using illegal drugs and possessing illegal drugs is a crime. So you've got to fill out this form. And on this form, you've got to say, I committed a crime. Or you can be charged for not admitting. So in my opinion, just from a legal perspective, I got issues with that form where the government can say, you got to write down, I committed a crime or not.
I see. Fifth Amendment.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that being said, so if someone said, look, Garland, would you pardon Hunter or anyone else who was charged with that? I'd say anybody who was charged with that crime, you put me in charge. Yes, I'd pardon them, simply because I have a constitutional issue with the government saying I got to fill out a form. And on it, I have to say I committed a crime, Fifth Amendment violation. Okay. But that ain't what he pardoned them for. He pardoned them for anything going back to January 1st, 2014. So if I'm on there with her, I'm saying, well, we can agree. He shouldn't have pardoned him for that. I mean, it was fine. I would have said I would have pardoned him for it. But explain this to me. Donald Trump was impeached. He called Zelensky and said, I think Joe Biden's up to no good in Ukraine and it needs to be investigated. And he was impeached, wasn't he? How dare he imply that Joe Biden and Hunter may have done something illegal in Ukraine? But now Joe Biden comes along and says anything that Hunter might have done in Ukraine, he can't be charged for. It's starting to look like perhaps they shouldn't have impeached Donald Trump for that. Like maybe Donald Trump's allegations had some meat to them. So forget that. Get back to Hunter Biden has been pardoned for anything he may have done in Ukraine when Donald Trump was impeached for implying that Hunter Biden and Joe Biden might have done something in Ukraine. It keeps going back to you know what? They're happy to talk about that. They're happy to talk about, well, he was an addict. Fair enough. And so he wasn't responsible. Okay. Well, he was charged with this and maybe he shouldn't have been. We can have that discussion. But why did you go all the way back? 10 years.
Right.
Every time. For 10 years.
Right.
Anything. He could have murdered people.
Right.
Thrown people out of windows. Child prostitution, which wouldn't shock me. But all these things, all the way back to mysteriously the start of this whole Ukraine conflict. I wonder why he chose that date.
Oh,
they can't have that discussion on mainstream media.
10 years of criminality. And to back your point up, do you remember when those whistleblowers went to Congress? Ziegler and I think the other guys.
Bobby Alinsky? Remember, Bobby Alinsky was one of the whistleblowers.
Bobby Alinsky. Yeah. I remember him too.
Yeah.
And what
there was a number of them.
Yeah. And what they pointed out was we tried to investigate Hunter Biden. We were not allowed. And when we were looking at stuff like the big guy, they was like, we weren't allowed. We were prevented from looking into it, and even looking into anything that might have led into Joe Biden, we were stopped. That was the only reason Weiss bought that case, because that case had been languishing for 5 years. They were effectively trying to let the time run out. And when those whistleblowers start talking to Congress, Weiss immediately got to actions like, oh, we got to bring this up. We got to bring this up. Yeah, they wouldn't allow it. You're right. 10 years. They wouldn't allow it. Just astonishing. I want to go to another thing that's taking place. So we have, well, it's not we, but there are protests that are taking place where they're trying to overthrow, have another Maidan in Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
And in having this attempted Maidan in Georgia, the prime minister said, I am not allowing this to happen. There will not be a Maidan 2.0. The president, who is expected or suspected to be a French agent, because she was French, she has dual citizenship, and is part of the EU, has refused to resign, or refused to leave on the date that she's supposed to leave, and is instead taking the pro-EU position, saying, I don't believe that the government was elected legitimately. I believe the Russians were involved. When they asked her for proof, she said, well, I don't really have proof. It's just the feeling that I have. If America can't find proof, well, certainly you can't expect me to find proof. I just feel it. And she has been leading these kind of oppositional protests to try to collapse the government. Europe doing the exact same thing that it did with Ukraine when it overthrew that government in 2014, the democratically elected government of Yanukovych. They come out and say, well, these protesters are love and light, and they're carrying lilies everywhere they walk. And the vicious government is attacking them and beating them. And they're holding their lilies as they're being beaten in the face by cops. This is horrible. This is effectively the playbook for the Maidan. These people have been using bazookas. They've been shooting stuff, set Parliament on fire. I mean, I got video of this. And you get the US and the EU fully in line with trying to overthrow Georgia. One of the guys, Mark Rutte, NATO Secretary General, he comes out and gives a speech, and he says this. And listen to what he's saying here. He's conflating democracy with Europe as they try to overthrow the Georgian government.
Really urge the moment is that all allies are making clear that any actions that undermine the democracy in Georgia, or to take democracy further, also on its road to more EU and NATO integration, Euro-Atlantic integration, so to say, that they really urge the Georgian government to stay on the path they decided a couple of years ago.
Okay, for one, that's horrible English. That's a horrible English. Two, if you notice, he said, stay on the path to integration. Anything that is trying to pull you away from NATO or the EU, and he is conflating that with democracy, while simultaneously having protests after protests where NGOs are giving out money and food in order to show up, in order to protest the government, trying to literally overthrow the democratic will of the public, because 56% or 54% of the people voted for the Georgia Dream Party. That is a Eurosceptic party, and that's a party that didn't necessarily want to be all that belligerent to Russia. He is arguing, well, we need to get you into NATO and the European Union. And they put off a vote, just like the Ukraine at the time put off a vote of a deal with the European Union as opposed to Russia, because Russia had the better deal. They pause. You get this conversation between Pyatt and Victoria Nuland overthrowing the government and putting the people in those positions. And I guess my point is, it is a bit rich. That's his speech while trying to break the government and the public will. Give me your take on this. I mean, do you think they're going to be successful with this Maidan 2.0?
No, a couple of things. Number one, and that is Georgia Dream won with 56%. In, at the same time that the U.S. empire was investing, millions of dollars and propaganda everywhere. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, they got like 20,000 NGOs in a country of like 6 million people, like one NGO for every 200 or 300 people. That's really something, every 200, 300 people get their own NGO, which shows this has nothing to do with Georgia. This is a gigantic investment so they can open a new front, surrounding Russia with bases, blah, blah, blah. But if you think about that, if they got 56% with a probably multi-billion-dollar investment, if in fact there wasn't that investment, they'd probably got 80%, right? So they have already won. and the old regime change machine ain't what it used to be. You know, people are wise to it. So now that they're like, basically, they're like, okay, we got to do the street protests, the color revolution, maybe some violence. However, the Georgian government already knows the game. So the Georgian government's, okay, they're going to do this first. Let's be ready for that. Now, you know, the violence is coming. There could be snipers. So if you know all of the games that they're going to play, the Georgian government, A, can prepare for it. B, they have the will of the people behind them. So I don't think they're going to be successful because the Georgian government has the will of the people behind them. They won outright, and they know the game they're going to play. And all they have to do is say, we're going to let this thing burn out. They've seen it. They thought, how about Iran? When there was this whole head scarf and some woman, of all things, the United States saying some woman died in the custody of the police. The U.S. is concerned with somebody dying in the custody of police, right? So they did this, and they did some violence and terrorism, and the Iranians just let it play out because they knew this thing's going to burn itself out. And I think what countries have learned about these protests, particularly in the cold, they can only go on but so long.
That's right.
And these people will be tired of being in the streets, and after a while, it'll start to dissipate. So I think what Georgia's going to do is what Iran did, and they're going to say, you know what? We'll push back as much as we need to push back, and we'll win by attrition. You know, as they say, you got the watches, we got the time. If we let you keep protesting and screaming and crying and making noise and saying we need to go with war with Russia, sooner or later, you'll get tired before the government will get tired because we're the government. And this French woman who's the alleged prime minister, you know, she was actually the ambassador from France to Georgia. And she denounced her French citizenship or ambassador so she could now, I mean, it's so obvious what they were doing.
They think she's a spy. That's like an intel person.
But so I think I think this game doesn't work because everybody knows the machinations of the game now, and they can just let it play itself out.
Garland, man, I always enjoy talking to you. I swear I do. Thank you for this. Garland Nixon. Definitely check out Garland Nixon on the Garland Nixon Show. He's an analyst, correspondent, and one of my favorite people. Especially favorite people to bring on the show. Thank you for this, man. I really appreciate it.
Keep up the good work, and glad to see you back. You put out a lot of really good, you put out a lot of great stuff. And, you know, I watch all of your stuff. You have good guests. You put out great stuff. You cover everything. Man. So, you know, I do watch, but pretty much everything you put out, when it pops up, I turn it on. You know, the only thing I watch is YouTube. Unless I'm watching a game or something, I'm going to be watching YouTube. So, but yeah, I watch all your stuff, and keep up the good work. I'm sure you're going to continue to grow and be a big part of the online community.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate this. I appreciate that. I really do. Coming from you, I definitely appreciate it. You have a good one, okay?
All right. Thanks a lot. You too.
All right. I want to bring in our next guest. We're joined with the one and only KJ No. Man, you are the person to speak to this morning. KJ No is a journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia-Pacific region. He's contributor to the book, Capitalism on a Ventilator, once censored by Amazon. It is now available at iacenter.org. KJ, how are you doing this morning? You doing all right?
I'm doing well. Good to see you.
I have been blown away by what is taking place in South Korea. You sent me that link, and I think my mom sent me like 20 minutes later, says, oh my God, have you seen what's taking place in South Korea? The president of South Korea, out of the blue, near midnight, screams for dictatorial powers and declares martial law. The guy who's running the martial law, the commander, goes to shut down media and the political space, meaning all protests stops, all political activity stops, and all media at that point is being controlled by the government. The military comes out, the cops come out. You have protesters streaming to parliament. You have the parliamentarians streaming to get back to parliament. 190 of them get in, vote it down. No, this is done. You're not going to allow martial law. The police and the military blow off Congress, meaning parliament, and continue trying to get in. And you get this image of all of these people with cameras, with barricades, standing there, holding back the cops and holding back the military as the parliament strikes it down. Like just astonishing scenes that are taking place. The president, after having withering opposition, backs away. And in backing away, he lifts this martial law thing. From my point of view, the president should be impeached or the president should resign immediately. What he did was outrageous. There was nothing that was taking place that legitimized him taking dictatorial powers in the way that he did, especially since he was trying to undermine the ability of the National Assembly to oversee what he was doing. He literally tried to stop them from doing that using the media, using the military to do so. Now, is anything I said is untrue, or do you need to correct anything I said? Because I wanted to give a base for us to have the conversation, because I am mind blown by this. Give me your thoughts.
No, it's I think you're right on all of the points. Just to kind of a little bit more detail,
please.
The president declared martial law at 10:30 in the evening, when everybody was in pajamas and just about ready to go to sleep. And then next thing you know, hundreds of National Assembly members, were running, probably with their pajamas still on underneath their clothes, trying to get to the National Assembly building, where they were blocked off not just by the police, but by special warfare operations. These are the Korean, green team, Green Beret, paratroopers. So they were blocking entry, and you could see that they were all kitted up, for full combat. Tactical vests, night vision goggles, assault rifles, and pistols, and they were ready to, commit a bloodbath. And remember, although South Korea has the authority, the president has the authority to declare martial law, he has to notify the National Assembly immediately. And then if the National Assembly rescinds it or rejects it, then he has to go along with that immediately. But one of the things that happened when he declared martial law is the order was given that nobody was allowed to enter the National Assembly building, right? So you knew exactly what was going on.
Which is why I call it illegal. I mean, because he, for one, under the Constitution, yes, the president can do so, but he can do so under certain conditions.
Yes.
Those conditions weren't met. He did this out the blue, and he did so late at night to prevent anybody from being able to respond to it.
Yes.
Like, all of this stuff was so illegal. Like it's so over the top to just say, yeah, I'm a dictator now. I'm a dictator now.
Exactly.
I'm sorry,
yes.
KJ, please continue.
I mean, this was a coup, or technically what we would call a self-coup to establish a dictatorship. But by 1 p.m., 190 assembly members were able to claw their way through the police barricades. Then they got inside the National Assembly chambers and they started to vote. And by 1 p.m., they had actually declared, they had rescinded the martial law declaration. In the meantime, the special warfare forces are trying to force their way into the National Assembly and into the chambers, but they were barricaded and blocked by, civilians. And so this is an extraordinary event. A few more points. Why did Yoon Suk-yeol do this? I mean, this was a 6-hour coup, the world's shortest coup, as far as I know. But why did Yoon Suk-yeol do this? He was facing, that's the special operations forces, that are trying to break their way into the chambers where the National Assembly members are trying to vote. Okay, so it's citizens barricading special ops from actually entering and trying to prevent the vote from happening. But why did he do this? Remember, you declare martial law if there is a war happening, or if there is an imminent threat of invasion, or if there's some massive national emergency like an earthquake or something, and order has broken down. That's when you declare national law. But there was nothing like that happening. The only thing that was happening that Yoon Suk-yeol claimed was, he said that there were North Korean threats. And essentially by North Korean threats, what he meant was that the opposition party was thwarting him in the legislature. They had shaved a tiny amount, I think it was 0.3% of his budget, and he, just couldn't take that. And they were also preparing to investigate his wife, who has been accused of corruption. And so this for him was the national emergency. I mean, these are all personal issues, but this was a national emergency. This was, the North Korean threat as he framed it. And then he went ahead and declared martial law. And this is not simply unconstitutional or illegal for Koreans. The two scariest words you can utter simply because of their history is martial law. Martial law means, torture, disappearances, random deaths, random killing. It's something that Koreans have a visceral, lived memory of. And so when he did that, the entire country erupted. And that's why so many people ran out, once again, practically in their pajamas. They were not letting this, the National Assembly is on an island, and there's a long bridge that goes there. And apparently that was blocked off to traffic. So people were running along the bridge and, rushing to, get to the National Assembly building in order to challenge, the special forces troops. It's an extraordinary moment. And it is, as the Koreans have said, they say this is a crime against history, because they've lived through that history and they never want that to happen again.
No, I agree with you. It is. I look, from my point of view, whether it's Trump doing it, whether it's Hillary Clinton low level doing it and not accepting the results of the race, there is something deeply unethical. There's a radical loss of credibility and trust when a leader is given that much power. I mean, because the reality of it is, like, the population is endowing him with power, with this idea that they trust him to use that power wisely and in the best interest of South Korea. They didn't give him that power to get frustrated with the fact that they were investigating his wife and that they shaved 3% off of his budget. And so his response is to freak out and scream, "This is now a dictatorship." Like, that is so beyond the pale that he has to be removed. Have they taken any action to get rid of him? Because there's no way they can allow him to stay in that office. From my understanding, the defense minister has resigned.
Yes, they've tendered their resignations. 6 of his top officials, including the defense minister, the minister for national security, etc. All the top national security officials have tendered their resignation.
I'm sorry.
We don't know.
Please keep on. I'm sorry. That was a mistake.
Yeah. We don't know if they've been accepted or not. Yesterday, there was a huge rally by the 6 opposition parties calling for both the resignation and the impeachment of Yoon Suk-yeol. The way that they see it is that this is a driver who is too drunk to drive. You have to take away the keys. You cannot allow him to continue to steer the ship of state. They have to take away the keys from him. And currently, as we speak, if I'm not mistaken, there are impeachment proceedings. An impeachment bill has been submitted to the National Assembly, and within the next few days, probably by Friday, we will know if he has been impeached or not. They need 2/3 of the assembly, 200 votes, to rescind the martial law. They got 190 people into the National Assembly, and all of them voted to rescind martial law. And they need 10 more votes in order to impeach the president, after which it goes to the Constitutional Court, and it takes another few months. But they're very close to having those 200, 201 votes in order to impeach him. Now, will Yoon allow this to happen? This remains to be seen. The martial
how does he stop it?
Well, it's a complex procedure, but remember, when the National Assembly rescinded the martial law declaration at 1 p.m.,
Right.
the martial law commander that he had appointed refused to follow those directions. And he said he needed to hear from the president himself. And then I think it was 4 p.m. in the morning, 4:20 p.m. in the morning, Yoon Suk-yeol finally came out and said, okay, I was just kidding, everybody. I pulled the fire alarm, but there really is no fire. It's all good. Everybody go home. And so he rescinded it. But the thing is, Yoon is fighting for his life, because if he gets impeached, then he no longer has immunity, and he will be prosecuted for all kinds of crimes, not the least of which is, as far as the Koreans are concerned, his declaring martial law without authority and without justification is considered to be sedition. That is a crime against the Constitution. It's a criminal action, and it's criminal conspiracy, because he had a whole group of people. Apparently, he was preparing this for 3 months.
Oh, are you so, wow.
Not kidding. Yes, 3 months. This was 3 months in the planning.
When I opened the show, I started my monologue and I pointed out that it's a crime. I say he needs to be, like, when you hear, let's say, people who are doing coups, people who are collaborators, those people are usually shot. And I'm not saying anybody should be shot. I'm just pointing out that there needs to be a heavy repudiation of this. And that's typically done through law. And if they're going to do it through law, he literally tried to kill the Republic, using his position to do so, and having a group of people around him that was willing to go along with him in killing the South Korean Republic. That is not something that they could stand for. And yeah, I agree. There should be jail over something like this. I guess my question is, to me, it's obvious that they should impeach him. I mean, the leader of his own party came out and said this was wrong.
Yes.
Meaning he couldn't even get his own political party to go along with him, I suspect, because what that leader of that party knew, that if this went through, even his powers were gone. Meaning they were trying to nuke Parliament, not the National Assembly. So certainly they have the votes to impeach him.
Yes,
right?
Yes. So once again, the leader of the PPP, which is the ruling party which Yoon Suk-yeol belongs to, the chair of the PPP opposed the action. And apparently during this 6-hour coup period, they sent special operations forces to apprehend the leader, Han Dong-un. I mean, they had handcuffs. They were, armed to the teeth, and they had zip ties and handcuffs. They were going to kidnap him. They also sent troops to the opposition party headquarters as well. So this was like serious stuff. And as I said, it was prepared apparently 3 months in advance. Yoon Suk-yeol went to this high school called Chungam, and then starting in September, he started to place all his high school friends in the top places in government, in particular, the Ministry of Defense, Ministry of National Security, etc. And so at that point, people said, this is very, very strange. This is dangerous stuff going on. And there was a lawmaker who said that, it looks like Yoon is preparing for martial law. And everybody laughed at him. And now, everybody's saying, yeah, you were right on. This was coming. You saw this coming. This train was building steam for a very, very long time.
So so the corruption is not just his wife, it's him included. So
yes. And he's the most unpopular South Korean president in probably in a very long time, since the dictators. His current, popularity is, I think, approval rating is about 17%.
Oh, that's going to go less. That's going to be lower than that. If he gets like 0.3, he's going to be in the negative numbers at this point. Like that's even worse though, KJ. Like the idea that it's one thing if you're hugely popular. It would be bad even in that situation. But at the very least, in that case, you had a majority of the public backing you. He is demonstratively unpopular. And it's like, I am so unpopular and I can't get anything done. The public is voting against me. They came out in the last election to vote against me. So screw it. I'm just going to take it all. Wow. Just wow.
But so do you know where he is popular? Do you know who he is popular with?
Who?
With the Washington crowd, with the U.S. national security state. He is Mr. American Pie.
Is he?
Remember, he went to the White House and he sang Don McLean's American Pie.
Oh, that was this guy.
This is the guy, right? He sold out the country for an autographed guitar.
So he believes that America power will keep him in office despite. Is that what he thinks?
I think so. The American national security state is really the force behind Yoon Suk-yeol. This is a man, he is like the Juan Guaido of South Korea. Absolutely no qualifications whatsoever. He had never been a politician in his life prior to suddenly become the president of South Korea. He had never held office. He had never won an election. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, dark horse, here he is. He is the president of South Korea. And he won with the narrowest, margin in South Korean electoral history. But just before he was elected, he got this like huge media platform on the most influential journal in the Western world, which is Foreign Affairs. This is the foreign policy journal of the Council on Foreign Relations. And he got this like huge spread where he got to confess his, allegiance to the doctrine of the faith of U.S. hegemony. And he said that, South Korea will have its own Indo-Pacific strategy, and South Korea's Indo-Pacific strategy is exactly the same as the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy, which is all about encircling and waging hybrid and kinetic war against China. That's what got him elected. And when he was elected, all the champagne corks in Washington blew up. Everybody was celebrating. This was early Christmas. This is Christmas in Washington, all the way around. So they were exulting that Yoon Suk-yeol was elected. But he, among all the Korean presidents, is probably the most unqualified. As I said, the Guaido. He's the, he's really a ridiculous personage to be holding the highest office, and yet the U.S. was so happy because they knew that when he got elected, everything they want on their Christmas list would get done, and it was done. He built relations with Japan, allowed the South Korean military essentially to merge with the Japanese military, the military of the former colonizing country of South Korea. Now they're in a tripartite alliance. And Washington really, really loves Yoon. That's why they invited him and had him do a minstrel show for them, right? I mean, that's his role for the U.S. national security state. But the Koreans despise him.
So politically, so there's the Democratic Party, which is the opposition party. That is the majority party, however, in the National Assembly, the one that is trying to cut his budget. I guess there are two questions. Politically, where does he fall? He is considered a right-winger. I'm not entirely...
Extreme right-wing. He belongs to the party that is simply the succession of the dictators. Park Chung-hee, No Tae-woo, Chun Doo-hwan, they're all dictators. He belongs to that party. They keep changing their name. because they want to deceive people. But it's the same party, the same people. These are the fascists, the extreme conservatives.
Now, why would the public put fascists in government if they, like, for example, in France, the National Rally, well, it's called something else. Well, National Rally, I just call them that. They, because of their vestiges going back to the Second World War, well, they're in Vichy France. They're literally kept out of government, even when the overwhelming majority of the public voted for them, meaning they got like 50-something%. But because of the way the parties were working together in the first and second round, they were able to keep them out of government in regards to out of power. So Marie Le Pen wasn't able to take office. It's not the National Front. It used to be the National Front. It's the National Rally, I think it's called today.
Yes.
But why wouldn't South Korea think the same way? I mean, wouldn't the vestiges of dictatorship be emblazoned in their minds of, this is a no. I don't care if you change your name. This is a no. Or was it that the Democratic Party in South Korea failed so miserably that the right was able to take power? What happened? How did this situation take place? How did he get in power?
It's a good question, and there's a complex answer to it. If you look at the progressive opposition, they come down from Kim Dae-jung to Roh Moo-hyun, and then Moon Jae-in. Moon was the most recent progressive president. And these people all come out of the radical student left, what we call the 386 generation. These were people who were in their 30s in the 1980s, and they were fighting against the military dictatorship. So they're really like the SDS of Korean politics. Moon Jae-in, it was very rare, it was very unusual that Moon Jae-in actually got elected, because prior to that, the president before that, who was also impeached, was the daughter of the dictator. Okay. So, why did they, elect the daughter of the dictator? Many reasons, but you can attribute it to, the way that elections are conducted in South Korea, the ways in which media campaigns are done, and the ways in which opposition candidates are blacklisted and undermined and taken down through dirty tricks. That's the quick answer. But nevertheless, the South Koreans rose up, what they call the Candlelight Revolution. Something like 20% of South Korea's population came out onto the streets. Tens of millions of people came out onto the streets and essentially demanded the resignation of Park Geun-hye. Her popularity was like 4%, which is essentially 0% if you consider the margin of error. And eventually she was impeached and was imprisoned, actually sentenced to a very, very long prison sentence for corruption. The prosecutor who prosecuted her was actually the current president, Yoon Suk-yeol. Okay, so that's how his star rose. But he had no political experience, and he had never, held political office. He was appointed prosecutor, and this is also context. He had actually failed the bar exam 8 times. He was a kind of a playboy born with a silver spoon in his mouth, failed the bar exam 8 times. On the 9th time, he passed it, squeaked through, and then through a series of opportunistic maneuvers, rose to become the chief prosecutor, which is like the attorney general, and then riding, the kind of reading the political winds, he decided that he was going to prosecute the daughter of the dictator, even though he belonged to the party of the dictator. So there was some internal, factional fighting. He was able to prosecute and convict her. And in the meantime, the previous president, Moon Jae-in, had designated a successor who was the mayor of Seoul. Seoul is, the most important city in South Korea. It's, it's like a fourth of the population. And anybody who is the mayor of Seoul is kind of a prime candidate to become the president. And he was also part of this 386 SDS radical generation. And he would have fit right in and continued the progressive agenda of Moon, including reconciliation with North Korea. Well, what happened a short while before the election is he died a very, very mysterious death. Okay, so the candidate that they wanted died suddenly, and they said it was suicide, but there are too many questions around that. And so then the progressive DP was left without a candidate. They rapidly brought in this person called Lee Jae-myung, who is now the lead opposition candidate. Lee Jae-myung is a contrast with Yoon Suk-yeol because they were both, they both passed the bar exam. But in the case of Lee Jae-myung, he was not born with a silver spoon in his mouth like Yoon Suk-yeol. He actually only had a primary school education. After primary school, he went and started working in sweatshops and factories. And, in these sweatshops, he got his arm mangled twice. And so he's technically disabled. He cannot use, I think it's his left arm, which is completely mangled. He's disabled. But even so, working working as a sweatshop worker inside a rubber factory, he went to night school classes and was able to pass the high school GED equivalency exam, and then was able to go to university. And then in university studied law. And after studying law, he aced the bar exam and then became, a lawyer, and then moved up, the judicial and political ranks. So it's such a contrast with Yoon Suk-yeol. One person is born in the lap of luxury, the other person is, a factory worker, and they're both facing off against each other in national elections. And Lee Jae-myung came within inches of winning the election. So there's still questions as to how fair this election was and whether there were dirty tricks involved. But after Yoon Suk-yeol is elected, the champagne corks go off in Washington. And the first thing that Yoon Suk-yeol does, and this is very interesting to note, is that he declares that he's going to move the presidential mansion, the Blue House, into the building of the National Defense Building. Okay, let me say that again. It's like, let's say Biden was elected.
Moving into the Pentagon.
Into the Pentagon, and the Pentagon has to move out of the Pentagon. So Biden says, I don't want to live in the White House. I want to move into the Pentagon. Everybody move my stuff out of the White House, move it into the Pentagon, and Pentagon, you go somewhere else. This was his first move.
What?
I'm not kidding you. Yes,
and
exactly.
Why did he do that?
We don't know, but people think that he was superstitious, that there was some feng shui practitioner who told him that every president who has been in the White House has come to a bad end. And that is true. The Blue House, the presidential mansion, has come to a bad end. That much is actually true. And so apparently, according to, rumor mill, his feng shui practitioner said, you need to get out of there. You can't be there. You need to move somewhere else. And so instead of moving into the Blue House, he was staying inside his luxury apartment in Gangnam. And then it took several months to prepare the Yongsan, National Army building for his residence. And in the meantime, there were hundreds of police that were escorting him from his private apartment, to the government buildings every day. And while this was happening, there was this huge disaster in Itaewon, the crowd crush disaster, where 159 young people were killed on Halloween. They got they got crammed together in a crowd. The crowd fell over. Next thing you knew, 159 people were trampled and suffocated.
Wow.
And all of this kind of signaled that Yoon Suk-yeol didn't know how to run the government, because what he had done was he had put his cronies into all the top positions, including his, kind of public safety positions. Nobody knew what they were doing. So you had these kind of immense civil catastrophes. So that should have sent the message already to not only the public, but to Washington, that this is a person who doesn't know what he's doing. But of course, they were just so intoxicated with the fact that here they had the perfect stooge. They had Mr. American Pie, and he was going to fulfill their Christmas, shopping list, which he did. But they didn't realize what a liability he is. And right now, what he's created a legitimacy crisis, not only for South Korean politics. He's actually created a legitimacy crisis for the U.S. itself. This is the U.S.'s client, quisling president, and it looks like he's going to fall soon. So the question is Washington going to continue to back him, or are they going to, see if they can usher him out the back door slowly? We'll see.
Wow. Amazing. I'm curious. Last question. If he is impeached or if he is removed, who takes power?
The prime minister takes power in a caretaker government. And then within a very short period of time, they have to hold new elections. If they do hold new elections, the opposition party is likely to win. And that will shift politics back to a more neutral and less US-centric foreign policy. In other words, they may undo some of these extraordinarily belligerent maneuvers against China. Remember, he has been going along with all of the US sanctions against China, and essentially he's been destroying South Korea's economy, including the crown jewels of South Korea's industry, which is Samsung Electronics and their chip manufacturing division.
Yeah.
Koreans are livid. They're furious with him. And as we've said, he's committing crimes against history. They want him out. They can't take the car keys away from him fast enough. And at the same time, the U.S. wants to keep him in power until at least they can find, the right replacement so that they can have a nice, transition and ensure that their agenda for Korea continues. The key thing that is most important about Korea, the reason why it's so important for U.S. geopolitical strategy, in particular for war against China, is the United States has operational control over South Korea's military. South Korea has 500,000 active duty troops, incredibly trained, incredibly war ready. As they say, we can fight tonight. And then it has another 3.1 million reserve troops who are also very, very combat capable. It's the world's largest military manpower. And the US gets that at a drop of a hat.
Wait. You said South Korea has the largest military manpower?
Yes. If you
China is 1 billion people.
China has, I think, over 1 million troops. But if you include reserve troops, which in South Korea are very, very combat capable, that's 3.1 million. So if we talk about 3.6 million troops, combat capable and ready to fight, that is the world's largest military manpower, plus all their, bases and armaments and weaponry. That's a tremendous, threat capacity. And the U.S. gets that for free. It gets that at a drop of a hat. It has eminent domain over South Korea's military. The moment that it decides that it needs it, the moment that it declares DEFCON 3, the U.S. gets all of South Korea's troops. And so that's a tremendous force multiplier for U.S. war in the Pacific.
Does South Korea get a say in that? Like if the South Korean parliament says, well, no, we're not doing that. I mean,
No.
like, for example, if there's some provocation to war with North Korea, for example, can South Korea turn around and say, well, no, we're not fighting this war. We're not fighting your war for you. Or is it automatic?
I would say that, there are these kind of pretextual things that make it seem like South Korea could have a say. But when push comes to shove, the simple answer is no. South Korea doesn't have any say over it. It does not have control over its own troops. The U.S. says that we only have wartime operational control. But the simple thing is that operational control only applies in war. So that's a pleonasm. That's like saying, I have drive time control of the car and you control it when it's in the garage. It doesn't mean anything. Okay. So the US has control the moment it declares DEFCON 3. And essentially the structure set up so it looks like that there's a kind of a joint command, but actually the command goes straight up to the US FK, UNC, CFC commander-in-chief, who reports directly to the US chief of staff, US Joint Chiefs of Staff, who report directly to the US president. So it's a direct line from the US president to all of South Korea's troops. And South Korea, I'm sorry to say, can't do anything about it. The other thing I'll point out is every single war that the US has been involved in, the South Koreans have been involved in too. Okay, so certainly the Korean War. During the Vietnam War, South Korea sent 340,000 troops to Vietnam. The second.
Are you serious? I did not know that.
It was the second largest deployment after the US itself. After 1972, the South Korean troops outnumbered US troops 2-1 in Vietnam. They were essentially fighting the Vietnam War for the Americans. Wow. And, for example, in 2001, in December, I received a call from somebody in South Korea. They said there are 500 South Korean officers going to Afghanistan tomorrow, and, they were telling me about this. But remember, in December in Afghanistan, South Korean troops were already in Afghanistan. It wasn't reported, but they were there. They're the Koreans are the first to go and the last to know. And anytime the US goes to war, South Koreans are right there. So even without the OPCON, the South Koreans are always following US military directives. But specifically in the situation of war on the peninsula or in the Pacific, you can be sure that US has total and complete OPCON over all of South Korean troops. And they're also in the process of creating that for Japanese troops as well. They're trying to create a joint command where the US and Japan jointly control Japan's military. But when you have that joint control, it just means the US is controlling it.
I'm an American, and I say that to say I have certain ideas and values of the world, a certain point of view that is kind of ingrained in me just because I live here. We don't have foreign military on our soil at all. We don't believe in having a foreign military base in America. The idea that there would be another foreign power that has control of our military is just outlandish to us. It wouldn't even, that doesn't even register that somebody else, a foreign power, would have control over the men and women that have that pledged themselves to the protection of this country. Like the idea that South Korean troops who ostensibly get involved in the military to defend South Korean territory and South Korean interests can be used by a foreign government for the interests of that foreign government is outlandish. And I said the same thing for Europe, where, Europe doesn't seem to have its own security. They don't have their own foreign policy. Like nobody cares about what Scholz has to say in regards to foreign policy of anything around the globe. And I would say the same thing would be true for any of the European leaders. Like it is super weird to me as an American that it's just odd to me. That's just amazing. KJ, man, thank you for this. Man, you're so informative. I deeply appreciate you joining me. KJ, no. He's a journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia-Pacific region. He was a contributor to the book, Capitalism on a Ventilator, once censored at Amazon. Once censored. It was now available at iacenter.org. KJ, thank you for this. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you. Always a pleasure. And you can also find me on the China Report on the Breakthrough News channel.
Thank you. The China Report, Breakthrough News channel. Definitely check KJ out. Man, deeply appreciate it, KJ. All right. we have come to the semi-end of the show. I say semi because at 11 o'clock, Kim Iverson is going to be on the show. Kim Iverson, I remember she told me one day, she said, my dad loves your show. I was like, really? She's like, yes, my dad talks about you. She really loves your show. And so that developed us talking every so often. And so recently I hit her up. I hadn't talked to her in a very long time because she's on the West Coast. And I asked her if she was willing to join. She said yes. So at 11 o'clock, Kim Iverson will be joining for a conversation. I look forward to it. Guys, I want to thank all of you for joining me. If you like it, hit the like button, share this content. You can support this content through PayPal, Patreon, or Super Chat. All stickers will be read, providing they're not racist, sexist, or bigoted. And again, I deeply appreciate everything that you guys do for this channel, for the show. I appreciate your support. I appreciate your comments. Yes, I do read the comments. Let's keep it up. I'm trying to hit 40,000 by the end of the year. So if you really dig yourself, or if you dig yourself, yes. But if you find yourself coming back here often, definitely hit the subscribe, hit the notification bell. Stay a while. Yes, I'm fatiguing. I was up at 1, 2 this morning doing shows. I couldn't sleep, and I was so annoyed by the crystal ball thing that I dragged my body out of bed in order to make that show, that skit. And then I turned around and did another one because there were a few others that I wanted to get to that I didn't think I would have time to get to during the show. So like it, share it, subscribe to it. I will see you guys maybe later today, most likely tomorrow. Depends on what happens on the ground. Have a good one all. Jamal Thomas signing off.